Daniel Henderson of 1002 Madison Lane, Tara Villano at 1009 Parker Street, Peter Villano of Falls Church, and Rishi Nangia at 305 North Virginia Avenue. Gene Gresco of 120 North Fairfax Street wrote regarding the process for converting existing non-conforming buildings into accessory dwellings and the minimum distance between a principal dwelling and the detached accessory dwelling. Mary Chavez of 215 Lawton Street and Christine Ward of 807 Fulton Avenue wrote regarding several topics to consider when reviewing changes to the accessory dwelling code. We also received several comments on the bicycle master plan update, those expressing support for it and also suggesting some changes, including Frank Williamson of Falls Church, Tim Roach of 1015 Parker Street, Jillian Economo, Joe Ganley, Andrew Olson, and Craig Berry of 800 Villa Ridge Road. John Fritsch of 603 Lincoln Avenue wrote with comments and suggestions for the greening of Lincoln Avenue project, and Frederick Thompson of 502 West Broad Street wrote regarding the ownership and management of a private drain on the Broadway condominium building property, and provided additional comments and observations from the Lee Park townhome site plan review process.
I know we had a lot of, we missed the last meeting, so we had a lot of built-up comments too, but clearly everybody's very engaged. And all of that was included in our packet. So
yes.
I'm sure our commissioners had a chance to read all of those, all the correspondence. Let's move on then to item 5B, receipt of in-person petitions. Mr. Trainer.
First one I have is Mark Gross.
Hi, Mark Gross.
Oh, make sure that speaker's on, Mr. Gross.
I'm sorry, what's
Is your mic on?
my favorite part? Got it?
There we go.
Okay, Mark Gross, 303 Lincoln Avenue. I want to talk about the accessory dwelling units. I have the advantage of I sat where you all are sitting for about 12 years when I was younger and much better looking. But the thing I want to say is this ordinance has a lot of things that we don't have answers for yet. We don't have answers on how high is too high. We don't have answers on how close is too close, or the width that allows trees. The draft ordinance has standards, but we really don't know how it's going to work out. But I think we're in an interesting position here, and we can know, because these are allowed in Arlington and Alexandria, areas just like ours. You can wait a couple of years and see what happens there at ADUs. How high is too high? How wide's too wide? How wide isn't wide enough? You will have, if you wait a few years of actually seeing what happens at ADUs, and then you can have an informed database on how high is too high, how wide is too wide. There isn't any reason that you have to enact this ordinance right now. There isn't anything pressing. You can wait and see what actually happens in areas that are just like ours, and answer all of these hard questions. The other point I want to make is I read a lot of the letters, and a lot in support said they are in support because ADUs will provide affordable housing. You don't know that. You don't know if these are going to be low rent, high rent, does it market rent or not. See what happens in Arlington and Alexandria. Hold off and see if they are affordable or if they aren't affordable. And then you'll know or have an inkling about what's going to happen if you adopt ADUs. I'm not saying don't. All I'm saying is you have chance here to actually see it in practice. So wait, see what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next registered speaker is Gene Gresco.
I'm Gene Gresco, and I live on North Fairfax Street. In today's work session, the planning staff will present a draft accessory dwelling framework with specific recommendations as was presented to the City Council on September 3rd. I look forward to detailed commissioner questions on each aspect, especially as to why the proposed alternatives were chosen. And like Councilmember Snyder said at September 3rd, those recommendations should not be based on red dot inputs of 6 dozen citizens who attended the poorly advertised library meetings held during the summer vacation period. In those library meetings, the top citizen concern was short-term rentals, which the draft omits a policy recommendation entirely. This commission must hold up the entire process if the issue of short-term rentals isn't definitively addressed. And all recommendations must ensure associated controls are in place. For example, if one unit must be owner-occupied, the city attorney must explain to you the means by which that will be verified and enforced, in court if necessary. A zoning code is just words on a piece of paper if it lacks effective controls. Thanks for the balanced analysis this commission will provide in the weeks ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker I have is Mark Cloutier.
Mark Cloutier, I live in 1308 Ellison. Thanks for hearing me out. And one of the letters mentioned I wrote. I'm not going to reread it here. I hope you had a chance to read it. The first part was impassioned in representing a person that wants ADUs, not for short-term rentals or rentals at all, but for family members and purposes unique to my situation, and I hope struck a chord with other citizens that may be in similar situations. I recognize that there's concerns about rentals and specifically short-term rentals. I hope the second part of that letter provided some analysis and some details and some recent studies of both Fairfax and Arlington on how much an ADU costs, what we think the amount of new builds on properties are going to look like. And not part of that letter, but some analysis afterwards suggests that if I'm doing a short-term rental, it's going to cost me on the low ball about 6 years to break even on a new build. So I think we need to look at ADUs more holistically than it is a solution to low-income housing and or short-term rentals, because there are a lot of citizens out there that see it differently. And what you all need to do, and I don't envy you, but you have to do what's best for the community. And I hope some of those letters were influenced by my reaching out to neighbors to say, hey, if you don't care or you're disinterested or dispassionate, but think from a community perspective that this is a good move ahead, then please write a letter in support. Because there's a lot of citizens out there that could care less what decisions are made, what recommendations are made by this council, and what decisions are made by the city council or by this board, and what decisions are made by the city council when it comes to ADUs. So the 90% of the population that is not passionate about it, I hope their voices were heard as well. So thank you for taking the time to read through those letters, and I appreciate the research you all are doing and have done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jimmy Jung.
You guys are Lee Park guys, I'm guessing? So I'm going to start in on Lee Park, just because Peruz and I have argued about Lee Park a little bit. And for years, he's been promising the community that his homes were going to be better than the homes on the other corner. But it's the same guys building both. And so I don't think there's any leverage in a promise that Peruz may have made, however heartfelt. But I do want you guys to not cookie cutter Park Avenue. So push them where you can. Let's try and make these things better. Let's try and make them different. Honest to God, guys, when I look at the two pictures, I can't tell which one's on which corner. So let's not have the entire block look the same. I really encourage you guys to push them on that. That being said, I'm going to talk about ADUs too. And I'm going to stretch Mark's point. We actually do have some insight into how this is rolled out. I walked into one of the first presentations. Mr. Krasner was there. You were talking, and some lady from Alexandria were giving examples from both communities. And I wasn't sure what to think, and what I walked away with was the real benefit of these things is not diversity or affordability. And every time I see it in one of these documents, it makes me itch. Because what we were hearing, and I hope you will correct me if I misunderstood you, but you know, the impact here is small. You're not going to get a lot of these. The real benefit here is for gentlemen like him in the back row, clunk. And so I think we need to approach it that way. We are looking to help folks that want to age in place. We're looking for folks that want to have their family stay nearby, that kind of thing. We're looking for individual solutions to individual problems. We are not trying to solve anything large. And what I heard from both Alexandria and Fairfax is we are not going to have a real impact on these larger problems. So let's stop talking about it. It sounds suspiciously like some of the other housing discussions we've had in the past where we're saying, oh, it's about this and it's about that, and it's really not. Again, those same two corners live in our T-zones, and we did not get anything out. Those are two of the prime pieces of real estate in our T-zones, and we did not get any of those rumored benefits, and I don't think we'll get anything like that out of this effort. So I want you guys to look closely at the ownership stuff, the rental stuff, the stuff that is not really going to help someone that's looking to solve a family problem, but it's going to help someone that's just trying to capitalize and try and steer us towards helping people and not these kind of larger swings, because I just don't think it's in there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Okay, so for these comments, it's great if you could address them to the commission, not to others in the audience, please. Thank you.
Next registered speaker is Fred Thompson.
Thank you. I'm representing the Broadway condominium, 81 units and over 100 residents. And this is I'm summarizing what remarks that I've submitted to you. One critical issue, I think, is unresolved through the site plan process, and I would like the city to really authoritatively resolve it prior to development, which is the drain that runs behind our building. The part of the proposal is to take a roof of one of the 3 units that's being built as part of this community and take that water into the drain. This is the first roof water that will ever have been submitted there. The city hasn't clearly indicated that it will own, maintain, and manage that drain as part of its city system, and we really want that issue resolved. So we want some attention put on that, and we want that issue resolved. I'd like to thank Henry Zhang and particularly note that he's done a great job in working with us on the site plan. Through the whole process, he was open, responsive, helped educate us about the limits of what could be done, and also give us information about what could be accomplished. There were 3 things that we think have made a difference here. The first is that the planter bioretention boxes are going to be managed by the HOA. We think it's too complicated to leave to the whims of each individual owner, and so that's a plus. The management of snow removal to be taken off-site and therefore not risk freezing over drains and causing flooding behind us. That's a positive thing. And then the third item is they've agreed to work to try to preserve a tree on the TCI property adjacent to us. That's critical to many of our residents for that to be both shade and also something they see out of their windows every single day. Mayor Tarter warned us and warned all of us that on several occasions that your process here as a site plan review is essentially ministerial, and there won't be changes as long as the applicant meets the zoning code and meets the other city fire and safety codes. So we recognize that. We were surprised to find out in this process that the stormwater reviews don't go beyond the actual site itself and don't look at the impact. And even though this is being held to a once every 10 years storm requirement, it's emptying into a stormwater sewer system that's not capable of even handling a once every 10-year storm requirement. So that's something that we, again, want the city to take attention to, even though it may not be part of your site plan process, but it is a critical part of something that needs to happen. The second, and you'll see a number of messages from the city attorney and the staff of the zoning authority and so forth on what is impervious surface. We thought that if you added the impervious surface and the non-impervious surface, you'd get to 100%. Turns out there's other categories of surface that are not dirt, but that are something that manages water and therefore are considered to be not impervious. And as a result, there really is no requirement in this T1 zoning for even a single inch of square inch of dirt. And I just would like to say in final that I'd encourage the City Council and the Planning Commission to rely less on voluntary members of the Economic Development Authority who may have business and investment interests in development, and to rely more on the recommendations of the Planning Commission and the city's professional staff when developing land use policy in the city, and that the City Council should resist the temptation to micromanage and micro-engineer development. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last registered speaker is Lorraine O'Rourke.
Hi, my name's Lorraine O'Rourke, and I live on Lincoln Avenue, and I'm here to talk about accessory dwellings. I don't feel particularly strong either way about them. I think there are times when they're really a good option for people. I just want to make sure we're taking our time and considering all the particulars surrounding accessory dwellings. My concerns are, as I read recently, around a 5-foot setback from property lines. It seems awful small to me. I'm concerned about stormwater runoff and how is that, if you build that in your backyard, what's that going to do to my yard? And the suggestion of selling them as a condo, I hope, is not being taken seriously. I was in Pasadena, California this past year, and they have a lot of 2 houses on properties, and I want to make sure we don't end up looking like that. What I saw was all concrete, hardly any grass in these properties, and I was just surprised, and I just really want to make sure we don't look like that. I brought photos if anybody wants to see a Google Map photo to see what I don't want to look like. And then, as Mr. Krasner said last year when he came and talked to a group about accessory dwelling units, they can be done well if they're done correctly. And so I just encourage us to really think about everybody, not, and how we can make this a good thing and not people not liking it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the registered speakers I have, Mr. Chair.
Again, if there's anybody else who wants to talk about ADUs, now's the time to give it. Thank you for the comments. Let's move on to the action item then. Item 6A, Founders Row 2, site plan amendment, public art.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The item before you is the Modera Falls Church, Founders Row 2, site plan amendment, plaza public art installation, munis number 2020-0877. The request for the commission tonight is to hold a public hearing and to make final consideration on the proposed public art that is to be included with the the Founders Road 2 project. By way of background, this is something that the applicant had committed to at time of special exception, and now they plan to see through as part of their site plan process. It has received positive, the proposed art has received positive recommendations from the Arts and Humanities Council as well as the Architectural Advisory Board, and staff also is recommending approval. The item was last seen by this group on December 6th of last year. With that, by way of setup, I'll turn it over to our case planner, Mr. Jeff Hollern.
Already? Good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Hollern with the planning staff. Paul caught most of my talking points, but that's okay. Planning Commission has requested to hold a public hearing and take final action on a site plan amendment for a sculpture on the terrace facing Southwest Street at Madera Founders Row, also known as Founders Row 2. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission approve the proposed sculpture design and subsequent site plan amendment for Founders Row 2 following a staff review and a positive recommendation by the AAB and the Arts and Humanities Council. The proposal is for a kinetic sculpture in the shape of two 20-foot and a 16-foot high stainless steel river grass structure that will move with the passing breeze. It will include a cable system that releases stored energy generated by the wind to rotate the steel panels. The public art amendment of the city's comprehensive plan promotes public art in a variety of areas throughout the city as it promotes economic vitality, growth, and sustainability. It is also an effective tool for placemaking and encouraging pedestrian traffic throughout commercial areas. On March 28th, 2022, the City Council approved the special exception application for Founders Row 2 with a list of voluntary concessions provided by the applicant through negotiation and coordination with the city staff. Voluntary concession 7I mentions that the art is to be processed as a site plan amendment through coordination with the Planning Commission and the Arts and Humanities Council. On August 17th, 2022, the Planning Commission approved a site plan for Founders Row 2, and that included a placeholder location within Founders Plaza along Southwest Street, which is where the future public art was to be placed. The artwork itself followed a similar public art review that was used for the Founders Row 1 mural project, which includes an early work session by the Planning Commission, reviews and recommendations by the AAB and AHC, and then back to the Planning Commission for public hearing and action. The artwork concept was called Rivergrass, was reviewed by staff with no comment and received positive recommendations from both of those groups. It is now before you tonight for final action. We do have Chad Price from Mill Creek Residential, as well as the artist Barton Rubenstein online with us to speak more on the project. Thank you.
Hi, Jeff. Hello, all. Good evening. Am I able to share my screen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I will, can you all see the screen here?
Yes.
Great. So, as Jeff prefaced, we've reviewed the sculpture with both AAB and AHC. This is for the Founders Row 2 project. There's 280 units here with about 22,000 square feet of retail and then 5,000 square feet of co-working space. We're moving on track for first units to deliver in Q1 of 25. But what we wanted to get your approval on today was specifically the art sculpture in the plaza. And I will skip a few slides just to kind of give you all an aerial of exactly where the sculpture will be placed.
Hey, Chad, are you able to full screen your present? It's a little tough to see.
Yes, 1 second.
Thank you.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we have a few aerials, West Broad elevations, now specifically the plaza. So the sculpture will be, directly in front of kind of where Southwest and West Broad meet. We have a pedestrian walk path where pedestrians will be able to walk up and get to our plaza. But the specific sculpture will be placed in this area here in the orange dot. So you can see the sidewalk here, Southwest, you have the ramp to get up into the plaza. This is the location of the proposed sculpture. I have a rendering here of the sculpture as well. Barton, do you want to give a quick overview?
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Bart.
Can you speak up,
Hello?
please?
Yes, I'm Barton Rubenstein. I'm a sculptor and public artist. I've had a career spanning about 30 years now, and my career has taken me to projects all over the country and internationally as well.
Barton, sorry to interrupt. We're having a hard time hearing you in the room. Are you able to get closer to your mic?
I'm right against my mic. I'm on an iPhone. Can you hear me? Hello?
We hear it.
Okay.
We can hear it. Go
I'll
ahead.
speak loudly.
Yeah, I think we
you can hear me, but I'm... Okay, so, as I said, I'm Barton Rubenstein. I'm a sculptor and public artist. I've had a career spanning about 30 years with projects like this, both across the country and internationally. One of my genres that I focus on is wind kinetic sculpture, which is what is being presented today. I engineered this cable system that is a zero maintenance system that I've used in dozens of projects, and we're very excited for the opportunity to place one of these pieces in Falls Church. So basically, this design is sort of the brainchild of our collective focus on environmental awareness. So as you might know, the Potomac River has been polluted for over a century, and there's a lot of efforts to make it a healthier river in which we can swim. And the river grasses actually happens to be a very important part of the ecosystem where health originates, if you will. So this is sort of what we're doing is we're creating awareness with this art. We hope to have a plaque next to it to share this particular story. And the piece, will have, it's very safe in the sense that there's no way to climb on the sculpture because it goes straight up for the first 10 feet and then it starts to deviate to the side. So there's no real opportunity for, anyone to climb on the sculpture. So, this is sort of part of my design process is making sure the sculpture is safe for the community. So that's basically it. I use a stainless steel material, which is a very durable material. It doesn't rust, and I have a brushed finish on it, which appears to be the most durable and the type of finish that doesn't show dirt very easily. So you can, even in neglect, the piece will look the same 10 to 20 years later. And as well, I've had pieces in Florida that have been a part of hurricanes where entire forests have been flattened and the sculpture is fine. So the sculpture has a very special design to it, and that's sort of just a quick summary. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from the applicant or Mr. Holman? Okay. All right. With that, let's move on to commissioner questions or comments. Throw it open to whoever wants to start. We've seen this once before, as was mentioned, so I don't think it's changed a whole lot since last time we saw it, but Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is not going to go to the aesthetics of the sculpture, which seem fine to me. But Chad, this is Phil Duncan. Just want to make sure that what you began with there was a statement that you hope that occupancy of the units will begin in Q1 of 25. There's no prospect that this installation would in any way delay, hold up, or complicate your proceeding with work elsewhere on the site to make sure that we hit that mark in early 25?
That's correct, Phil. I do want to caveat, though, there is a tie to our final 20% COs with the sculpture. as part of our voluntary concession. So, no, there will be no holdups with first unit delivery and installing the sculpture.
And the, and the actual installation, is it, two guys in the truck, or, what's the time frame for actually putting it in?
Pardon?
I can answer that question. It's Barton Rubenstein again. The plan at this moment, assuming we can move forward with the contract in the next week or so, is to begin fabrication, which takes about 2 to 3 months minimum, and then the sculpture would be brought over, in a U-Haul truck, and I would have an installation crew, which could include like a telescopic forklift that would lift the pieces and drop them onto the bolts to secure them. So we expect that to happen before February 1, hopefully, at least a month before that.
Okay, all right, that all sounds good. Of course, Chad, you guys are pros now at choreographing your work on Broad and on West and on Ellison with school schedules and weather schedules and so forth, but just want to make sure that when this goes in, that it's done with the same kind of communication that you've had with the neighbors and others. If it's going to take more than a day or so, there'll just be some folks curious about, how long it's going to take to put the installation in and when it's going to be over with and when the building can get up and rolling. And there's a lot of good news, including the news of the Tate Coffee upscale cafe that's going to go in the corner space there. And the neighbors, of course, have gotten their belly full of construction disruptions. So I just want to make sure that February 1 sounds great, and let's hope that this goes in without any hitches and is a nice addition to the plaza there. Thank you.
Good question. Anybody else? Nope. All right. I really think I like the sculpture. I think it's very cool. It's going to make an excellent addition to the public art in the city. I like the reference to the river, so I think it's fantastic. Ms. Coleman?
I would just agree. I'm a fan of the design. Thank you for your creativity, and look forward to seeing it in real life.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think
Thank you very much.
our role is pretty modest here. I think it's to make sure that the overall process is fair. And I think it has been. We've got the benefit of those that probably think about this a little bit more knowledgeably than perhaps ourselves, although I shouldn't assume that. Meaning specifically the AAB and Arts and Humanities Council. So both of their letters seem positively disposed. So with that, I'm happy to move this for our vote if we're at that point.
Great.
Whereas the special exception approval for the Founders Road 2 project included a voluntary concession.
Mic on, Dan?
I'm sorry?
Your mic on?
Yeah. So I need to move it over a little bit. Okay, is that better? Sorry. Whereas the special exception approval for the Founders Road 2 project included a voluntary concession to provide public art and further stipulated that the public art be approved by a site plan amendment. And whereas the proposed site plan amendment meets the required considerations for site plan approval per the Falls Church City Code and the approved special exception resolution 2022-15. Whereas the applicant has followed the guidelines for a previously approved Founders Row mural accepted by the Planning Commission on October the 7th, 2019, as required and outlined in the voluntary concession 7I, Founders Plaza art installation, a public review process was held that included and engaged with the Arts and Humanities Council and Architectural Advisory Board to develop, as well as members of the community, resulting in recommendations by the ACC and AAB to the Planning Commission to approve the planned artwork, a sculpture. Whereas the proposed sculpture is consistent with the West Broad Street Small Area Plan, Comprehensive Plan, and City of Falls Church design guidelines. And now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission approve site plan amendment for application number 2020-0877 to permit the installation of the proposed sculpture on private property as developed by the applicant pursuant to the December 20th, 2023 referral and modified in consideration of Arts and Humanities Council comments of March 20th, 2024.
It's been moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Krasner. Roll call vote, please. Mr. Trainer?
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Friedlander?
Yes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Ms. Comont?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Hyra?
Yes.
Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes 7-0.
Thank you very much. Look forward to
Thank you.
getting that thing installed. Okay,
you very
item
much.
6B, Lee Park Site Plan, public hearing. Mr. Stoddard.
All right, thank you, Chair, members of the commission. The next item up for you, it's actually a double item. It's one project, but it requires two applications. The first is site plan application unit number 2024-0416. And the second application is subdivision application, which shares the same unit number, 2024-0416. This is the Lee Park application. The request for the Planning Commission tonight is to hold a public hearing and to take final action on the two applications, the site plan and subdivision. Planning Commission last reviewed these materials during a work session on July 17th of this year. Staff does recommend approval on both items. As usual for complex applications, there are some minor sort of labeling items that we can describe in more detail, but we recommend approving contingent on those being addressed at the staff level. With that, let me turn it over to our case planner, Mr. Henry Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Starter. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. For the record, my name is Henry Zhang. I'm the lead reviewing staff for this project. I will go directly to the case. Submission 2.0 was received on July 31st as planned. 4 notable changes included here on line 40 is the additional treatment as suggested by staff previously in the last report has been provided in building design of the 3 proposed model to greatly increase the individuality of the units fronting both Park Avenue and North Lee Street, as well as the visual interest of rear elevations of all the units. Number 2 is a refined landscape plan has been provided and address planting material selection, shade tree spacing, tree canopy, among other prior comments, and is further accepted by the city arborist. Number 3, a lot of revision has been done to the stormwater management and also sewer information as requested has been all provided. I will not read it, just have too many items. It's all on line 47 to 52. Number 4, a fire engine turning movement study also included in this submission 2.0 that demonstrates successful movement of a typical Arlington County tower ladder truck in and out of this development. Line 56 to 58 basically are those questions and comments received during the July 17 work session. There are a total of 15 comments/questions. In this table, in the left-hand column, basically are all those questions and comments received. And then in the right-hand column are the answers to the question and also response to the comments. I will not read them unless there are some questions. Line 160, basically it's the additional stormwater analysis. Staff provided here tried to answer 3 general and also specific questions. The first question is, what are the code requirements pertaining to the site put to this side for stormwater quality and quantity. And then the second question is, what are the existing conditions and the specific, considerations for this site? And then the third question is, how is the applicant addressing all those code requirements and specific considerations? The analysis has been discussed in detail in line 168 to 206. Staff basically concluded that the subject application meets all the code requirements for stormwater management and stated in chapter 35 of the city code. If need me to go in detail, I can go. Otherwise, everything is analyzed here in the staff report. I will go now to line 343. It's the board and the commission comments. We receive, we send this 2.0 submission to both the UFC and AAB. On line 350, UFC review and comments on this 2.0, and then provide a memo on August 16. Specifically, they have comments on planting material selection, the distance between shade trees, and canopy calculation. On August 22nd, UFC chair, city arborist, and applicant's design team review those comments. And on August 23, the design team provide a full memo, which included an attachment, basically address all the comments and concerns of UFC. I think urban city arborist basically in a total agreement with those comments and the responses. This also sent to AAB, but as mentioned last time during the quorum of the AAB, there's no meeting held. We did ask the city's attorney opinion about this. I think city attorney in a memo dated July 30th, clarifying that Planning Commission's authority to proceed with the final action with no recommendations from AAB. So basically, the city attorney concludes that the Planning Commission may take final action on this application without first receiving a written recommendation from the AAB. Lastly is the citizens' participation. You heard Mr. Thompson's early remark. Basically, for this 2.0 submission, we received 2 correspondence from the Broadway Condo Community Relations Task Force. The first one, basically, they have extensive comments on 5 subjects, including landscaping, HOA responsibility, impervious surface, performance of the planter box system, and routing of storm water. I think in response to those comments, we organized a staff team, applicants design team, and the neighbors on a meeting on August 22nd. Basically answer all their questions. In addition, staff also provide email communications with the neighbors on specific questions such as maintenance of the planter boxes. Those are also in the attachment. They also, I think the Broadway Condo Task Force also had an email on August 16, asked the city attorney to interpreting how the impervious surface will be calculated. I think the city's attorney basically believe this is a technical issues and then defer to the technical staff, which include the zoning administrator, whose email response has been attached to this report. Basically, the conclusion is that this planter box is not normal planter box because they have 18 inches planting medians. Within that box, they have a shrubbery. Even though the bottom of the planter box is concrete, but they have a discharge pipe over there. So the purpose of that is dual purpose, both the quality control and quantity control. I think this kind of treatment meets the city's stormwater ordinance, and then therefore, the staff concludes this type of treatment is non-impervious. So zoning administrator specifically indicated this type of areas will not be calculated as impervious areas. Therefore, the conclusion is that the lot coverage will not be exceeded. Based on all the analysis of the updates on this site plan and subdivision application, staff finds the site plan application satisfy the applicable requirements of Chapter 48, and the subdivision application meets all applicable requirements of Chapter 38, and then staff further recommend approval of the two proposed motions. That concludes the staff presentation. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Thank you for all your work on this. I'm glad the comments called out your effort on this.
Thank you.
It's a public hearing, so before we want to hear from the applicant maybe, but see if anyone from the public is here to speak on this item. Strand, do we have any more?
No one that has submitted speaker slips from the beginning of the meeting.
Oh, let's hear from the applicant first. Is the applicant on?
Yes.
Oh. Sorry, I thought you'd be over Zoom.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. It's great to be here again to present the site plan application for the Lee Park Townhomes. My name is Andrew Rosenberger with Madison Homes. I'm joined by Mark Westmoreland with Madison Homes, Max Burkhalter from Walter L. Phillips, Rodney Williams from Devereaux and Associates. I think we also have some others from our team that are joining virtually. I want to keep my remarks for tonight brief. Some of this is going to be a review from the July work session. I want to start by thanking Henry Zhang and staff for their work and professionalism on this. Henry's communication and management of this process has really been outstanding. I'd also like to thank the neighbors that have participated in several meetings with us from the Broadway. We met with them on several occasions, and they helped us understand their concerns, and we've worked hard to address as many of those concerns as we could. So moving on, the site plan, you've seen this before. It hasn't changed. Park Avenue is on top. North Lee Street is on the left. It's 20 townhomes. It's a mix of 6 20-foot wide townhomes, which front onto Park Avenue at the top. Those all have a 2-car garage. And the remainder of the site and the 2 buildings toward the bottom is a mix of 14-foot wide townhomes and 16-foot wide townhomes, all of which have a 1-car garage. This page really shows a summary of the primary criteria that are associated with the T1 zone. I'm not going to go through every line on this list. I will spare you that. But I do want to point out that we are meeting every single requirement that is applicable in the T1 zoning ordinance. This is a true by right project, and we are not requesting any variances or waivers as part of this application. Again, you've seen this before, but I felt that these perspectives really are the best way to demonstrate what the project will look like when it's complete. So this is Park Avenue and Lee Street. You're looking at units 1 through 6, so fronting onto Park Avenue there. Those are the largest units. You can also see going down Lee Street on the right is the Broadway in the background. And I think what this image does better than anything is really demonstrate the height and the massing transition from the higher, more commercial-oriented buildings on West Broad Street toward more residential on Park Avenue. This perspective is looking across North Lee Street into the top of our alley. That's lot 1 on the left and lot 7 through 10 on the right. I do want to point out, if you look on the side of lot 7, there's a little shed on the bottom that will house all of the electric meters associated with that building. Each building will have its own similar shed. So we'll get all of those, we'll prevent all of those meters from cluttering the alley. We will not have any gas meters because everything here is all electric. And all of the HVAC condensers are located on the roofs of the units and screened. This is the same building as the previous slide. It's just a slightly different vantage point. This shows the entire building. It also shows the spatial relationship between lot 13 on the right side, and on the far right side on the edge of the photo is the Broadway condominium. So it really shows that relationship. It's just over 22 feet brick to brick between those two. And again, this also demonstrates the transition from the higher, more dense to the lower or less dense development. This is the final building, the third building. We call it the Muse Building, which faces to the east. We worked hard to create a pleasant pedestrian environment for these units. This photo also demonstrates the step back that is really applies to all the buildings on the 4th level. We are stepping back from the Broadway, which is basically off the photo to the left. As well, we're stepping back on the front as well. And that's the front step back really applies to all of the buildings. So as we've reviewed this project with staff and talked with neighbors, stormwater management, I think, has appropriately been the focus of most of the comments that we've had a discussion about. So I kind of want to highlight and get a little bit deeper into some of these issues. So I first want to point out that there's no stormwater detention currently on the site, and it's a largely impervious site. There's also a recognized capacity issue with the existing city stormwater management system in this area. This that floods during heavy rains. This property is at the bottom of basically an 82-acre drainage area. But as a result of this flooding, that basically triggers us to take special actions in engineering this site. So what we did is actually we're required to reduce the peak runoff rate from pre-development conditions. And I'll get to that reduction in a minute, but or at least in the numbers, but I want to talk about how we're achieving that. And that is really through the use of these individual on-lot bioretention planters that will detain 46% of the total runoff, while also improving the quality of that runoff that eventually reaches the streams and eventually the Chesapeake Bay. These bioretention planters will also be maintained by the HOA. They will not be maintained by the individual homeowners. So this slide shows the drainage divides that exist on the site currently on the left, and what will exist after development is complete on the right. Essentially, there's 3 outfalls. There's outfall 1A and 1B, which join just on the other side of Lee Street from lot 13, and then there's outfall 2, which goes off to the bottom right-hand corner, and eventually all of the water from this site, both post-development and pre-development, join just on the other side of the Broadway, and then they will cross Broadway underneath Broadway and outfall into a tributary for Trips Run. So just looking at the percent decrease of that peak flow rate during a 10-year storm, which is what the ordinance has us looking at. So in outfall 1A, we're decreasing by 30%. In outfall 1B, it's 36%. And in outfall 2, it is 31%. So pretty substantial reduction. The overall, on a weighted average, the total reduction in the peak flow rate during the 10-year storm is 31.5%. And again, this reduction is achieved through the use of these bioretention planters. taking a slightly deeper dive, this is just focusing on Outfall 2 in the pre and the post-development. Outfall 2 is closest to the Broadway. It actually, once the water leaves our property, it traverses across the Broadway property. So as you can see here, the surface area that drains to that outfall is decreasing. We're going to be detaining 33% of that water versus 0%, which is detained today. The peak flow rate decreases by 30%, and actually the total volume even decreases, the total volume that will flow through that pipe, again, in a 10-year storm. So pretty substantial decrease in terms of the overall impact on the larger stormwater facilities in the city. So we did make some changes. Henry alluded to some of these in his presentation, but from our second submission. And I should point out that everything I'm quoting here kind of incorporates these changes. So the surface area for the bioretention planters has been reclassified as impervious for stormwater purposes. Henry said it was non-impervious, and that is correct for zoning purposes. So there's a distinction here. So it is non-impervious for zoning purposes. So in terms of calculating our total impervious area for the zoning purposes, but for stormwater purposes, it is treated as an impervious surface area. And that was a determination that was made by staff. We also added control structures in each planter that will further reduce the peak flow rate during storms. We have increased the detail that is shown on the stormwater. We actually submitted that. We took advantage of the postponement from the meeting 2 weeks ago and prepared and submitted just the stormwater sheets. We went from 14 sheets to 27 sheets. So it's a pretty substantial increase in detail that we've provided. We're not going to get into that level of detail tonight. But we submitted that last week. We don't have any comments yet, but we wanted to get a head start on that as much as possible. We've also recalculated the tree canopy. As Henry alluded, we've incorporated notes on the plans that will incorporate root pruning along the property lines so that we can do everything that we can to maximize and preserve the off-site trees without providing as little disturbance as possible to them. And that will be overseen by the city arborist as well, or coordinated with. We've also added materials, color schemes, and some labels on our architectural plans, and also responded to some ministerial comments, such as labeling on some of the engineering sheets. So again, I wanted to keep it brief. I know there's probably going to be questions. I welcome your questions. I have other members of the team here that are also available to answer any questions that I'm not able to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, as I mentioned, it's a public hearing, so now we will take comments from the public. Mr. Trainer, do we have anybody who wants to speak on this item?
No, I don't have any more speaker slips other than those folks that have already spoken.
Is there anybody in the audience who wants to speak on this item? Okay. If not, we'll turn it over to the commission. So,
Mr. Chair, did you want to close the public hearing?
Pardon me? Did you close the public hearing? And then we'll open it up to the commissioners for any questions, comments. I guess we can do the site plan and the subdivision at the same time. I don't see the need to distinguish between the two. Who wants to kick us off? Mr. Krantz.
I can start. Yeah, actually a couple questions. I probably should ask staff. Maybe, I apologize if staff went through this. I mean, there was a lot in the presentation. For the resubmission, because I know the motion here is still, kind of conditioning of another submission for minor technical updates or changes. Can you just go through those? I know you say they're listed in the table, but I just didn't see them called out. So what is staff expecting, assuming we were to approve it, or what are the technical comments that staff's looking for them to address?
Yeah, that's a fair question in terms of what is staff actually
I thought it was a fine line. I'd like to know where
with
you're
the
at
action. And I might actually turn that over because he's been looking them over in such detail. Mr. Zhang, if you could speak to those remaining items that are still in the staff comments.
Yes, for the record, this is Henry Zhang. The comments, for example, such as previously we don't have a building material and also those color scheme, even though they included in the last presentation, but didn't include it into the 2.0 submission. And then we basically, I think is the attachment 2A in the report. There are detailed list on the table. And then the other thing, like, the stormwater calculation nodes, for example, we need to have a 10 years event for the 2-hour retention for the planter box, so on and so forth. Just some example. So they agreed to include it. Actually, some of them, for example, like a color scheme and those dimensions, they are already provided because of the cancellation of last planning commission's meeting. So
Do we
they
have that in our
provide-
package?
Yeah, we do have the package.
No, do we have it? Is it in our package?
Yeah, I think it's attachment 2A is a DRC staff review comments on submission 2.0, dated August 16. Jack, would you please click that attachment 2.2A, please? Yeah, those are the comments.
So those, right.
Those are
I'm
the
sorry, can
comments.
just to clarify the question, are you asking whether the elevations are included in the packet or whether the comments are
The
included?
comment
in the-
about, well, the question about building materials.
Yes.
So those are included in the packet, and I think they came in as slip sheets subsequent to the formal submission, and so I think the request from staff is just to get one clean submittal.
Right. But what's in our package is
It's
the final set, is what you're saying, as far as the building materials go.
It is, it's attachment 1G.
1G, yes.
Okay. And then for the stormwater details, what's still outstanding? I know the applicant just mentioned they provided sounds like a pretty comprehensive revision. Has Public Works reviewed that?
The submission, I think it increased from 14 sheets to 37 sheets. Send it back to us. The answer to your question, no, because our outside consultant is on leave. So actually, Chris is here, should be virtually, who is our third-party stormwater management review team. Chris, if you're here, would you please chime in on the most recent stormwater management set review, please?
Yes, I'm here, Henry.
Okay.
So just to provide like a little overview of what's outstanding for stormware.
I'm sorry, can you just identify yourself for the record? Can you just give your name and just where you, I didn't know we had a third-party consultant. Maybe other people do.
Yes, I'm Chris Chernell. I'm the Manager of Engineering at Wetland Studies and Solutions.
Okay.
And we're the third-party review consultant for the City of Falls Church.
Okay. All right, yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
So there's some outstanding items on the stormwater review, and as others mentioned, they're going to be resubmitted. But kind of to give a brief overview, really looking for the planners to be an impervious area. And I understand they've updated those calculations and submitted those, but we have not reviewed those yet. And then there were some other items, like just some errors in the tables to be resubmitted. Some routing calculations for stormwater we need resubmitted. There are some manual inputs from hydrographs. They were going to provide additional detail on those. And then there are some calculations. I'm looking at the comments now. Some calculations on the peak storm events that need to be resubmitted. And again, I understand these have been completed and submitted, but we've not reviewed them yet.
Okay. Do you have any concern as far as, the applicant's ability to address, you haven't seen what they've resubmitted, but as far as, I guess what I'm concerned about is, something that you would find that would require a more significant revision or change, that we don't have in front of us today. If it's minor things, I mean, I kind of view of like what would happen post planning commission action with staff would be, cleanup items, things that are relatively minor as it's worded there. I don't want to put you on the spot since you haven't seen it yet, but did you have any concerns with the overall concept as far as how they're meeting the requirements?
I think that, again, disclaiming I have not reviewed the submittal yet, but I think that the remaining comments were relatively minor. They walked through them with us on the phone, and they sounded reasonable how they were addressed, but we haven't reviewed those yet.
Sure.
And then kind of pending some other interpretations, like, we're looking at the 2-hour storm instead of 24-hour storm. So I think we've resolved all that. So that was kind of one of the major outstanding items. So I think that they're just minor things we're looking at this point.
Okay.
And Christy's on the phone, and correct me if I'm wrong, Christy, she's with my team and one of the reviewers as well.
Correct. This is Christy Brown with Wetland Studies and Solutions. And yes, we have not completed the review, but we did flip through the pages on the phone with the design engineer, and the information seems to have all been provided. We just need to have the time to actually complete the review. But we do not expect changes that would affect how the site is laid out, or anything of that nature. That if there was anything, it would hopefully be handled via calculations or very minor edits.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you for that answer. Okay. Yeah, and then that's true. Then that I would agree that would fall into a category of something that I might consider technical, minor, that could happen post. But we have to be careful with that. And I know sometimes syncing up the timing of these things is hard, and so sometimes things aren't completely ready for us with a red bow on it and perfect, especially on a site plan. Site plans have a lot of details and a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross, and I appreciate that. And so I don't have any problems with staff approving certain things administratively after the fact, but we have to just be careful that we're apprised of what exactly it is that we're technically delegating to staff afterwards. So that's my main concern. I mean, otherwise, I think I chatted with staff offline before the last hearing, before I knew it was going to be canceled, as far as questions about the outfall. And I think that's been addressed, I suppose, the question about adequate outfall, since we had the stormwater reviewers on the phone. Because I know that was the question from the Broadway folks. It was like, concern about the off-site pipe. But as far as, adequate outfall and sort of like those kind of baseline requirements they need to meet here, there was no concern, right, about them, that they've demonstrated that, correct?
This is Christy Brown, again, for the record. Correct. Due to existing flooding within the stormwater system, the reduction in peak flows for the 10-year storm satisfy the stormwater ordinance. We will be dotting our T's and crossing our I's when checking those numbers and inputs that were put into their model to confirm that is truly, that we are in concurrence with that. But as long as that is met, that is the only part of the stormwater laws, regulations, and also the Falls City ordinance, Falls Church ordinance, that is required for flood protection criteria.
Right.
So they would satisfy those requirements.
Okay, great, thank you. I think that's all I have. I mean, I appreciate also just, I'll say more when there's a motion, but I mean, I appreciate that, staff provided some additional materials, related to my comments about precedents and other examples of the design. I had expressed some concern about the narrow width of a few of the units. I still have concerns about that. If the market supports it, I suppose, so be it. I guess those will be priced a little bit less, and I guess that's a good thing, for that, as far as that goes. So yeah, like I said, overall, I think I appreciate those additional materials that were provided. I mean, there are also some comments I saw from forestry that I guess kind of got worked out. UFC had a bunch of comments that seemed to be in conflict with our urban forester or the city arborist rather, and they kind of worked it out, I guess, on plan choices. But am I correct? Is that's all been worked out? Our city arborist is comfortable with what's shown here?
That's correct.
Like the Sycamore and some other things?
I was in the meeting, so, yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Okay, okay. And I appreciate, I just don't want to undercut urban forestry. They had a lot of comments, and then a lot of the responses were like, well, maybe they're wrong. Which I know, as plants are passionate, it can be a passionate topic. People have different opinions about what works, what doesn't work. But, okay, I appreciate that. I think that's it for me, for now. I don't want to compromise all the time, so, thank you.
Thank you. And good catches on the changes. You don't want to approve anything that does get substantively changed, so. Any other comments from commissioners? Side, Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In this section, I just want to focus on one thing. I think you referred to the access by fire and emergency vehicles being something that's been worked through and worked out. This is a density of development along Park that is not unprecedented. There are townhouses all along Park Avenue, but this is a, uniquely dense community. And I just want to make sure that we have done certainly everything that code expects and ask if there is any additional measures, either type of construction or type of fireproofing or whatever that has gone into or will go into the construction of these buildings that would protect us from, some sort of flash fire situation. I wonder if the applicant could speak to that a little bit more.
Absolutely. So we've had several meetings very early on with the fire marshal, obviously to make sure that the dimensions that are within our alleys are appropriate, because obviously that drives the design of the whole site. So we did have several. I think we had 2 discussions with the fire marshal regarding that, and he seemed satisfied. With regard to additional fire measures, each of these units is a 4-level unit. Each will have its own sprinkler system within. That's actually a building code requirement in all of the units except, I believe, lots 20 and 13 closest to the Broadway, where it's not required. Nonetheless, we will be providing sprinklers. It's our intent to provide sprinklers within those 2 units as well.
Okay, very good, thank you. The only other topic I just remembered I wanted to bring up for a little further discussion, don't want to go down the rabbit hole too far, but the bioretention planters, this person here doesn't really quite understand why they're not counted as pervious, because the whole purpose of them is to capture, hold, and gradually release rainwater. Maybe a topic for future discussion by the Planning Commission as to is there anything that we have built that is comparable to what you're proposing for these bioretention planters? Elsewhere in the city, staff might speak to this.
I think the library has one, which it's just the same thing. It's a planter who has, those planting material and then planting media inside. But at the bottom, it's basically concrete, but it has the discharge. That's basically we have in the city. I think Oak Park also the same design. And I think I also stated in the staff report, basically, it's not something new. I think Arlington is doing this a lot. Basically, our practice here is consistent with Arlington County. And then they specifically, in their stormwater management manual, categorize this as a managed turf. They call it the urban bioretention facilities. So it's not something totally new to us.
Okay, good. Well, as I say, going forward, it seems to me like we should encourage these sorts of facilities, and if you could get credit for them being at least partially pervious, it would seem to encourage usage of them, not only in multifamily developments, but in, tear down mega houses too. Okay. enough of that for right now, but for further discussion. One other thing about public safety, you spoke about snow removal. Sounds like the snow will not only be shoveled, but actually removed from the alleyways. Since you're at a corner, you've got sidewalks on both sides. When it snows, if it ever does snow again, given climate change, but when we get a heavy snow, yeah.
So the snow removal will certainly be handled by the HOA. So all of the snow removal in the alley and probably the sidewalks will also be removed by the HOA, not the individual unit owners.
Right, okay.
I think the situation where the snow would need to be literally hauled off in this area is pretty rare, just because of the levels of snowfall that we have been getting and are typical in this area. So it would require a pretty heavy snowfall for the snow to actually need to be removed from the site. I mean, we certainly have, I understand the concern of the Broadway. I think if we were to, for example, if we were to pile up snow at the bottom of the T,
yeah.
We're basically, in that case, we'd be creating a dam where the water wouldn't affect, even as it melted, it wouldn't affect so much the Broadway. It would create a pool in our town, in our alley. So we have a vested interest, obviously, and our HOA will have a vested interest in making sure that the snow is not just haphazardly piled as it's plowed.
Yeah.
And removed.
Yeah, I think that's, particularly as it relates to the side of the building that backs up to the Broadway, where you have provided a nice, breathing distance between the two buildings, as you showed in your renderings. But yeah, well, if we do get a heavy snow, we don't want that space to be filled up to the brim with, piles of snow that don't enable neighbors to get along well. Last thing, leaves. There's movement in town to leave the leaves rather than pick the leaves up when they fall. I guess this would probably be up to the HOA, I suppose. But do the trees that are the trees and green space that are in the public right-of-way count as part of your development, or is the city responsible for removal of the leaves from those trees?
I believe it will be the HOA that would be responsible for removing the leaves that fall from those trees.
So,
and again, that would be something that the HOA would perform.
Okay.
Again,
all right. Well, just
contrasting the HOA from the individual homeowners.
Exactly. I hear where you're going. Just ask staff to, make sure that whatever we do at the other townhouses along Park Avenue, it's consistent with what's done here, so that nobody claims that they're especially burdened by some unexpected responsibility. The HOAs for both these both these townhouse developments should be treated the same way, I would think. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Freelander.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have just a couple of quick questions, because discussion happens later. But the maintenance of those street trees, since we're talking about the street trees, is that by the HOA, since the street tree canopy is counting toward your overall canopy?
So it is the intent, our intent, that those street trees would generally be maintained by the HOA. I know in some instances where there's a special exception, there is a public space maintenance agreement that we will not have that here. We will have in our HOA documents that do get reviewed by the city attorney that the trees will generally be maintained by the HOA.
Great, thank you. And then my other question is really more towards city staff, because as I think we've established, the applicant has addressed the stormwater requirements that they're required to address. But what is the elephant in the room, in my mind, is still what we've been talking about since I joined this commission, which is the capacity of the city's systems and how we're addressing that. Because to me, I'm excited for this project, but I'm really conflicted because we know, and it's stated here in your staff report, that the city has a problem And we need to address that and tie the resolution of that to this project. And, you know, we're holding the applicant captive on that.
So if I could, so for any development application that's proceeding through the development process, they are always held to the same set of standards. Regardless of what site you're developing, you're held to the same set of standards, and that's what's been applied in this application. I agree with you to your broader point about the infrastructure challenges that are facing the city. It's one of the reasons why we're undertaking a review of our public facilities and utilities chapter now. It's why the City Council reconstituted the Public Utilities Commission. It's why the City Council invested the money in the Big Six stormwater projects. So stormwater and the need to update that system to meet not just the challenges of today, but tomorrow, it's a known issue, and those steps are being taken. And at the same time, we're continuing to apply development standards as they are written.
Can you refresh my memory how we're addressing that specific locale and what the timing of that is?
So that is probably best looked at within the CIP. I know the city staff is still wrapping up the Big Six. I'll get to it in your look ahead later, but I know we're scheduled to get a kickoff of the CIP in the fall, and that's sort of on the customary schedule. And if stormwater is of particular interest to the group, I can't ask that we have a special presentation on that.
I think that would be imperative, especially considering some of these applicants that are coming through.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I address this issue as well? Just one thing that we have done, obviously we recognize that there's been a flooding problem and that there's a capacity issue. So as a builder, delivering houses, selling houses to future residents of Falls Church, we took the additional step for our own sake we actually engaged Kimley Horn, who is the engineering firm that is prepared the model, I think, for this entire 82-acre, perhaps more, drainage area. And we had them look at two things. One, we wanted to make sure that in the event of a 500-year storm or a 100-year storm, that the finished floor level of our units is dry. It is, based upon even in a 500-year storm event, so once every 500 years. The other item that we wanted to look at is when we get a 100-year storm event, when we get a 500-year storm event, what happens? What's the impact of our development on that water, on the level of that water? And based upon Kimley Horn's model, which is used and relied upon, I believe, by the City of Falls Church, they plugged our development into their model. Don't ask me how, because that's beyond my pay grade. But their conclusion was that in the 500-year event along our border with the Broadway in particular, looking at that area, that the water surface elevation increased by 0.027 feet. It's about a quarter of an inch. Right. So we felt very comfortable in both of those statistics, that we're really not having any impact on the water surface elevation during a 100-year storm event or a 500-year storm event, much greater than the 10-year storm event that we're basically designing to in our submission.
Thank you. I appreciate that response. Thank you.
I think
Mr. Chairman,
on top of the stormwater issues.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just one last observation. I think a city's system is separate system, separate from sewer, from the sanitary sewer, from the stormwater sewer. And then during this review, staff found both systems are not sufficient. It's not because of this application.
Correct.
Because not only we have a modeling of the stormwater, but also a modeling of the sanitary sewer. I think this portion, this vicinity was identified in an early study as deficiency areas in the city. So they also proposed some treatment, but I think that need the city's attention on it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, thank you for staying on top of stormwater issues. Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I think I would characterize this as saying that the post-construction runoff is less than what's there currently. and so it meets our code. However, it is going to empty whatever water is left over into a system that can't handle it. That's basically the challenge that we have. Obviously, this is not going on to City Council, so there's not much we can do, in our motion here to say, more needs to be done. But obviously, it's an issue I think that we all feel pretty concerned about, and that there's a need to come up with a translation of what's needed in our system to be able to handle it so that we don't get the choke points that inevitably are going to cause flooding and hurt people's property, as indeed it's done in the past. Just a question for you, and first of all, thank you very much for the information that you provided to me on this private drain with the visuals and so forth. But I'm still not real clear on who owns that drain and who's responsible for maintaining it.
According to DPW, this basically the city's maintenance responsibility.
Okay.
So even though on the plat it's a private drain, but technically it's a city system.
Right. Okay. I think that should be made clear, because obviously there was question amongst the folks in the Broadway, and I wasn't able to divine it from all the materials here as to who actually owned it. So thank you for that, and hopefully that will clarify it for people in the Broadway as well. I don't really have a lot of other questions. Most of the issues are kind of broader and fall outside of the of this application. For example, we kind of learned from here that only 3% of the canopy coverage comes from trees that are on site. The rest of it is in the city's right of way. So that suggests that maybe we want to go back and take a look at our code to see if some improvement there. Again, that doesn't affect the approval process on this application. The other issue is, well, let me come back to that in a second. Oh, I'm sorry. The other issue is just the density of the units. I mean, this meets the code. There's no question about that. But I think now that we kind of see this, I would wonder if staff has any interest in taking a look at possibly revising our code in some way to get the balance correctly. Right now, it's kind of, they go right up to the limit as far as what's needed without providing any affordable units. And what we wind up with is a pretty dense area. So they're kind of lessons learned. Don't think I have any other issues that caused me any problems with what otherwise is a pretty thorough and complete application. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Come on.
I have no additional questions. I just want to thank you, Mr. Zhang, for your professionalism, your excellent staff report, and for convening what sounds like a very productive August meeting between the applicant and the Broadway task force. I think this, encouraging proactive communication, being proactive about encouraging good communication between parties when there are concerns or disagreements is a really great way to make sure that we arrive at a place where everybody is, if not completely 100% happy, at least more comfortable than they were when they started. And we have a better project, it sounds like, for it. So thank you for all the work that you did on this.
Yeah, I agree, especially with having the neighbors call you out and compliment you is certainly a testament for all your hard work. Yeah, I agree. I don't have any other comments either. Everything I have has been addressed. I'm a strong supporter of the buyer retention features. I'd like to see us use them more. I'm glad you mentioned Arlington. They do quite a good job with this. And I think, like everybody, we all agree that the city needs to take a comprehensive look at stormwater capacity and all the infrastructure issues. Again, not really addressable here, but certainly something I know this commission will be talking to city staff about. I also did understand the private drain thing, so thank you for bringing that up too, Mr. Stevens. So with that, those are the main comments I have. Anything else from the commissioners? Any questions or comments? Mr. Hiram?
Yeah, I'll keep it really brief. I'm hearing it's my birthday. I can't believe it. Like, I get to spend my birthday with all of you on the Planning Commission. How fun. So I will not keep us here any longer.
Cupcakes, you didn't tell us.
Yeah. I told my students that this is how I spend, this is my fun time, coming to the Planning Commission. They all laughed. But I just want to say, I don't want to take too much time. You guys have heard the way I feel about not just this development, but our T-zones and the lack of affordability, which is not necessarily related so much to this applicant, but it's the way we structured this. Until we get a T-zone that has some affordable housing in it, I'm not going to vote for it. So I just wanted to make clear to the planning commissioners, to the staff, to the applicant, why I will not be voting for this. But I think that all of you who have been with me on this ride of the T-zones understand that. So I don't need to go into detail on it again tonight. But I'm glad that this has been approved and that many of the other issues related to this site are being addressed. And I'm also glad that there are things that are out of the purview of this one particular site related to stormwater and our sewage capacity that others on the commission have brought up that we need to address. But I just hope that we are as diligent with addressing our broader affordable housing issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hira. Anything else for the good of the order?
There was one small thing in the drafted motion that I just wanted to ask Mr. Zhang about before. It's in the second whereas, where the lots are listed. It has lot 19 listed twice, and I think the first 19 maybe should be 17. Is that correct?
So the 19, so which one? I'm sorry, I'm not.
Highlighted there on the screen.
Yeah, if you read it, sorry, so it's lots 8, 9, 11, 12, 16, 19, 18, and 19.
19, right.
So I think
Right,
it should be 16, 17, 18, and 19. I just wanted to make that correction before we read it out.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for that typo.
No, that's okay, small thing.
Good catch.
Good, yeah.
Very good catch. Okay. I think at this point we are ready to entertain a motion.
I'm happy to do it.
Let's go.
Are we doing both at the same time?
I think separate votes.
Do them separate?
Subdivision first and then the site plan.
Okay, so this is the for subdivision application. Okay, whereas the Planning Commission finds that the approval of the subdivision application meets all applicable requirements of Chapter 38 subdivision regulations, and whereas the proposed subdivision application is to consolidate the existing 2 parcels and re-subdivide into 20 lots. Lots 1 and 6 are 1,080 square feet. Lots 2 to 5 are 960 square feet. Lots 7 and 13 and 14 are 825 square feet. Lots 8, 9, 11, 12, 16, 17, 18, and 19 are 800 square feet, and lots 10 and 15 are 700 square feet in size, and one parcel, parcel A, of 12,749 square feet in size. And now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission approve subdivision application pound 2024-0416 to create the above-mentioned 20 lots and 1 parcel, contingent upon the applicant resubmitting an updated subdivision plat in final form to be reviewed administratively and approved by the planning director that addresses the following. 1, minor administrative labeling comments, as noted in the attached staff comment tables to satisfy applicable subdivision code and regulation requirements of Chapter 38.
I'll second.
So moved and seconded by Mr. Stevens. Roll call vote, please, Mr. Trainer. Or any comments on the motion?
Discussion on the motion? Yeah.
I'll comment on the site plan. Subdivision's fine.
Okay. Just getting ready to vote. If there's no comments, roll call, please.
Okay, Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Friedlander?
Yes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Ms. Comat?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Hira?
No.
Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
Thank you. The ayes have it. Motion passes.
Now, a motion for the site plan application.
I can do this one.
All right.
So for the site plan application, whereas the Planning Commission finds that the approval of the site plan meets all applicable requirements of Division 7 site plans, including Section 48-1141 of the zoning ordinance, and whereas the proposed site plan is for development of 20 townhomes and 3 models, with a net floor area ranging from 1,000 to 1,248 square feet for 14-footers, 1,512 to 1,522 square feet for 16-footers, and 1,745 to 1,771 square feet for 20-footers with elevator. And now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission approve site plan application 2024-0416 to permit the construction of the proposed 20 townhomes, contingent upon the applicant resubmitting an updated final site plan and subdivision plat to be reviewed administratively and approved by the planning director that address the following. 1, minor technical comments as noted in the attached staff comment tables to satisfy applicable zoning code and regulation requirements of Chapter 48.
It's been moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Duncan. Any comments, discussion on the motion? Mr.
I have
Krasner.
a comment, and I'm going to support the motion. I wanted to make a few comments. I'm not quite in the camp of Commissioner Hyra, but, I do share some concerns, not to the level, that he does, maybe to not support it, but because I feel, we set it up this way. So to the extent, and I've already heard some comments from folks on the commission about, the T-zones, and now that you're beginning to see what it looks like, I think, again, it just speaks to how important it is as we look at any zoning ordinance amendments, whether it was T-zones or other things we're looking at, that we're very careful and deliberate, because the market moves quick, and, if you can have a lot of unintended consequences. And I don't think we have anything here that is completely at odds with what we expected, but as far as, affordability and other things, we need to be very realistic about what the market is. And, I think we're getting here what, we've kind of set it up to be. And so this applicant can't be penalized for that. We're at a site plan stage, and I think the site plan is reasonable, and they appear to have met the requirements for a by right development. So, we can't, some of those big picture things like stormwater, when it's by right, there's no ability to require above and beyond the minimum requirements for stormwater. There's really no ability to go above and beyond on anything, because that's not what it's by right. That's the definition of it. And there are a lot of times where that works, but maybe there are times where the extra scrutiny and the ability to kind of go and, participate in more of like a negotiation, so to speak, with the community and the city and a developer can yield a good result at the end of the day. That might be better than by right, even if it takes a little longer. So that's kind of my editorial comments on it. I don't think we have a terrible end result here, but it is dense. There are certain layout things that I think for decades to come, people might walk by and say, I wonder how that happened, to be laid out that way. How did the city approve that? Well, we know why and how, and it wasn't intentional necessarily, but we have to be careful. And I think it's a cautionary tale. But like I said, I think it'll improve some of the view along Park. I think they'll be attractive, at least as far as the frontage on Park goes, and they're meeting the minimum requirements that are in the city ordinance. So therefore, we're really bound to approve it. So for that reason, I'm going to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Just one closing thought. I'm committing the sin of, this has already been said, and I'm going to say it again, but I do want to thank Henry and the rest of the staff for being on duty 52 weeks of the year. I mean, used to be in the Old Falls Church. As soon as you hit the 4th of July, things sort of came to a slow, and you didn't get much done until after Labor Day. It strikes me that you all have been hard on duty through the summer, and, even though the Planning Commission hasn't met for a while, you brought us something that reflected lots of effort with the neighbors and with the applicant, and I just want to express my appreciation for you all being on duty during a time when, others might have gone dark. The reference earlier on to the ministerial process, I mean, I've not been on the Planning Commission that long, but I understand the legalities, the differences between a by right and a proffer sort of situation. It does strike me, though, that for a ministerial process, there was a fair amount of dialogue and give and take and a certain amount of compromise, or at least a search for solutions on tough spots. You know, you can hear us wrestling with, should we have more trees and fewer units? I get that. I hear that. On the other hand, if you're looking for price tags, fewer units you have, the more they're going to cost. So am I willing to give up a few trees in exchange for, some smaller units that might be a little more approachable in terms of affordability for a family just starting out in Falls Church? Yeah, I'm willing to make that trade-off. We've been talking about this for some number of years. The stormwater, I remember Fred Thompson and neighbors coming to the EDC at least 5 years ago, because it was before COVID, in the temporary city hall. And I remember we said then, you got a water problem and you're doing some things inside your own building to address it. City probably needs to do some things on its dime, over on the Broad Street side, but this particular development at least holds the potential to make the situation somewhat better, certainly no worse, and I think we have landed at that spot after at least 5 years of discussion. So, again, thanks to all who've been involved in all this, and the only other thing I would close with is, because of my experience on West Street over the last several years, the construction of Founders Row and Founders 2, like when you get approval, get on with it and get the thing built. And if there are any issues about subcontractors, making deliveries or telephone poles that need to come down or whatever, stay in close contact with the city so that there are no inexplicable delays caused by something that we can't anticipate right now that could be addressed more quickly if everybody just paid the same amount of attention to it in the construction phase as we've paid to a lot of the details in the planning phase here. So I would just encourage us to keep our guard up, and I know the Broadway HOA will keep us honest, keep the applicant, delivering the product and doing the construction in a way that minimizes the disruption to the nearby neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Agree with both set of comments. Any other comments on the motion? Okay, Mr. Trainer, roll call, please.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Friedlander?
Yes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Ms. Comont?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Hyra?
No.
Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The ayes have it. Motion passes.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Thank you to the applicant. I agree. Let's move it ahead. All right. Plowing through the agenda, item 6C, Planning Commission minutes from July 17, 2024. Any comments on those minutes? If not, we have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moves. I think I was there at both meetings, so I can so move.
Moved by Mr. Duncan, second?
Second, this is for both sets of minutes?
Just for the 17th.
Just the 17th. Yes. Second.
Second by Ms. Comont, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Item 6D, Planning Commission minutes from August 7th, 2024.
Oh,
comments?
I did notice one small thing, line 112. There's a reference to Miss Stoddard. I think maybe we can make him Mr. Stoddard.
Is Paul's wife here?
What line was that?
112.
Don't get fired for that one.
That's it. That's the only thing. Otherwise, these looked good to me. I can move to approve them with that amendment.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Mr. Duncan, I think. With that change, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
So I'll abstain. I wasn't here.
With 2 abstentions, Ms. Freelander and Mr. Krasner. All right. you want to move ahead with the work session items, or do we want to take a break, or how are we feeling?
About a 5-minute break.
5-minute break?
Yeah, that
Five,
Good.
7-minute break.
Okay. 7-minute break until 9:22.
on for several months. These same materials that you're seeing tonight were seen by City Council early in September. It's the same materials we'll use for the town halls later this month. After we receive input from all these different stakeholder groups, we'll be preparing draft code, which will be reviewed again by this group as well as City Council and again by the community at open houses. And then after a round of improvements is made to that draft code, then it'll be put forward for final consideration. And even that will take several months. We expect November through the earliest final consideration would be in February of next year. So I just wanted to lay that out in terms of a timeline to explain why what's presented to you looks a little bit loose. It's not in formal code language. It's because we're not ready for that stage yet. We haven't gotten the level of feedback we need to do that. But what you are seeing is a proposal around what the dimensions could look like, what the programmatic elements could look like. To introduce more about what the framework is and how it was developed, I'll turn that over to our staff planner, Mr. Jack Trainer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Good evening, Commissioners. As Mr. Stoddard mentioned, I'll be walking you through the draft framework tonight, which again is really just kind of the bones of a draft recommendation for possible updates to the city's accessory dwelling regulations. Draft framework was developed using national best practices and input from public meetings and city boards and commissions, such as this one, data collected at 2 open house meetings, and analysis of proposed state code regarding accessory dwellings. Before I get into the draft recommendation itself, I want to talk just briefly about a little bit of background and some of the public engagement that has been done to date before covering the draft recommendation itself, and then I'll wrap it up. So just by way of quick background, familiar to this commission by now, accessory dwellings have become popular in cities across the country as a tool for increasing housing availability and reducing housing costs while having limited impacts on community character or sense of place. Common uses for accessory dwellings include housing for extended family members or family members that need to live nearby, and providing a source of supplemental income for homeowners. Common regulations for accessory dwellings include certain dimensional and programmatic standards, including those in this draft recommendation. Some examples of dimensional standards include floor area or size, building height, setbacks, impervious lot coverage, and tree canopy. And programmatic standards include things like parking, short-term rentals, ownership and occupancy requirements, and the approval process itself. I mentioned a minute ago some of the benefits of accessory dwellings, but we've also included here other potential impacts that accessory dwellings could bring that staff is continuing to study, such as the fiscal and facility impacts to stormwater capacity and school capacity, various equity and privacy concerns, and environmental impacts. Again, staff is continuing to engage those with expertise on accessory dwellings and in some of these areas that are, both work for the city and those in our local or neighboring jurisdictions. So speaking of those kind of engagement efforts, I'm going to talk a little bit now about the public engagement that's happened to date. We've had 7 public meetings discussing accessory dwellings since this initiative has kicked off. That includes work sessions by the City Council and the Housing Commission, Urban Forestry Commission, Environmental Sustainability Council, and this Planning Commission. Staff's also hosted 2 open house meetings that were both held at the Mary Riley Stiles Public Library. The first was on Tuesday, July 23rd, and the other was on Sunday, July 28th. We counted approximately 90 residents attended across the 2 sessions. And so as part of those public engagement or those open house meetings, staff gave an overview of accessory dwellings and why the city was exploring potential updates to its regulations, followed by a question and answer session. And then attendees were invited to participate in a dot voting exercise, identifying preferences within a range of values for a variety of accessory dwelling related considerations, both programmatic and design. Those results are collected in a couple of tables here. I won't go through all of them, but beginning on line 175, we've collected the results again across those 2 days for those design considerations, including height and floor area, setbacks, and both rear setback and side setback. And then for the programmatic considerations, in addition to things like parking and ownership and occupancy, we also asked folks what interests them about accessory dwellings, and then what concerned them about accessory dwellings. We also asked about short-term rentals, and I think I covered parking, ownership, and occupancy. And so now to walk through the draft recommendation itself. This is, again, kind of split into 2 parts, the first being dimensional and design considerations, and the second being those more kind of programmatic conceptual concepts. So beginning with, in the dimensional realm with gross floor area, the draft recommendation for this component is to allow accessory dwellings to have a size of up to 50% of the primary dwelling square footage, or 1,000 square feet, whichever is less. Regarding the attached or detached form of accessory dwellings, the draft recommendation is to allow both of those forms. And for maximum height allowances, the draft recommendation has it to allow accessory dwellings to reach a height maximum of the lesser of either 20 feet or 1.5 stories. Regarding setbacks, this is kind of split up into generally, and then we've included some detached accessory dwelling specific language. So beginning with the first 2 points for setbacks, the draft recommendation is for 5-foot side and rear setbacks, and for a 25-foot separation minimum from any public street right-of-way. So the detached accessory dwelling specific language, beginning with point C, includes that no windows facing adjacent lots above the first story for parts of the building setback less than 10 feet from the side yard line. And I think I kind of jumbled this at the council work session as well, but this recommendation is basically not to allow windows facing adjacent lots on a detached accessory dwelling that is less than 10 feet from the side lot line above the first story. For the second detached accessory dwelling point, the draft recommendation includes an 8-foot minimum separation between the nearest walls of the detached accessory dwelling and the primary dwelling. And then the last detached accessory dwelling specific setback recommendation is for a detached AD to be located no further than 500 feet from the primary dwelling. Regarding lot coverage, the draft recommendation recommends compliance with existing standards. Those are included in the far left column. Here, again, this is what's on the books for single-family homes in the R1A and R1B districts currently. That includes a 25% building coverage maximum, a 35% impervious surface coverage maximum, and a 20% tree canopy coverage minimum. So again, the draft recommendation is to remain compliant with these standards, even if you add a detached accessory dwelling. So moving into the programmatic standards, beginning with location, the draft recommendation is to allow accessory dwellings as by right accessory uses in the R1A and R1B districts only. Regarding parking, the draft recommendation is to include no off-street parking requirements for accessory dwellings. For short-term rentals, the draft recommendation is to not make an immediate change, and for the city to consider an accessory dwelling specific regulation within a citywide policy. So currently the city does not regulate short-term rentals per the zoning code, including accessory dwellings. And so the recommendation is to consider a citywide policy for short-term rentals and consider accessory dwellings in that context. regarding ownership. The draft recommendation is to establish owner occupancy requirements for either the primary or the accessory dwelling. And for occupancy, rely on the current standards as dictated by the building code. For existing accessory buildings, the draft recommendation is for accessory dwellings and existing non-conforming structures relative to any updates that get approved for those structures built before January 1st, 2024 to remain as conditional uses for accessory dwellings, and for their conversion to become an accessory dwelling be subject to a one-time special use permit granted by the Board of Zoning Appeals. And lastly, for approval, the draft recommendation is to require a residential building permit for an accessory dwelling. This includes associated trade permits, and to allow no more than one accessory dwelling per lot, whether that's attached or detached. So I'll just wrap up again with the timing section. I know Mr. Stoddard just covered this, so to reiterate, we're in this third phase covering the draft framework. We're looking for feedback on everything that's in there. We'll be having 2 additional open house community town hall meetings beginning next week, next Wednesday, September 25th. That one's right here at City Hall beginning at 6 o'clock. And then the second one is scheduled for September 29th. That's a Sunday following. And that one is going to be back in the library at 2 o'clock. And then following that, again, we'll take all the feedback we've gotten during this phase and previously and start working that into code. And again, kind of further molding the draft recommendation, which will remain a draft certainly up until council's first reading, which is scheduled for November, moving into that final consideration phase, which the final consideration date right now is scheduled for February 2025. So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainer. Any other comments from the staff, Mr. Stoddard?
No, I think Jack did an excellent job of summarizing sort of where the framework is. And I think probably what's helpful tonight is to really hear that feedback from the commission around both the dimensional issues as well as the programmatic issues to help inform sort of what happens next.
Agreed. Thank you for the comprehensive look, and thanks for all the materials. Clearly, this is an issue that's not very unique to Falls Church, right? Obviously, it's something that's being discussed all across the country. Lots of good examples, so thank you for that. As was mentioned, it's a work session, so we're not taking public comments, but I want to throw it open to the commission now for really anything. Any questions, comments, thoughts, perspectives on this? There's an awful lot to chew on, so we have left time. Ms. Coleman to Mr. Stevens.
Well, I just actually have a suggestion, and you can not want to do this, but I'm wondering if we kind of want to go through the table and talk about each of these in turn as a group, or if it's more productive for people to sort of list all of their comments in all of these different areas one after the next. I would, yeah, I'd kind of prefer to kind of talk through the table. So let's talk about floor area and ask all of our questions then and have a discussion. And then the next thing, it might take a little longer though, so I don't know how people feel about that.
I'm good with that. I think we'll have probably similar comments on lots of these things. So.
Yeah. Is
Fine
that
with that,
okay
anybody?
with you?
Ms. Freeland?
Can we ask questions first before we dive into the
Big picture
details of the
questions,
table?
Big picture questions? Yeah.
Why don't you start us off?
Thank you. So I've got a question. Regarding the definition of attached, detached, where does the interior within an existing primary structure land? Or is that in addition to the attached, which to me is an addition that gets attached to an existing primary structure, detached, which is totally separated? Where does the interior fall?
So detached, right, obviously doesn't share a wall with the principal structure. Attached can be anything, any floor area within the primary structure. In terms of the definition, I'm not sure if the definition is, at least in the zoning ordinance, is so specific about the parameters of that, especially regarding, since there's no separation of ownership like right now in the ordinance. So it's a tricky question, and maybe one we might want to clarify a little more.
I think we'll need to, because I think, it was great that you guys included all that extra literature. I really did pour through a lot of that. But I think there were like 6 different types, and I don't know if we need to go that far, but I think we definitely need to identify, like, if you've got an existing structure and you want to dedicate your basement or your attic, and you're not doing anything to the exterior of your building, I think that's a little bit different to me than an attached, because an attached is you're adding on to the existing structure.
I agree. Yeah, there's attached versus internal, and even that can be perhaps a different definition, and even different definitions of attached, whether you're sharing a wall or perhaps a breezeway. There are different aspects that could define what an attached accessory dwelling is, and so that's a point well taken.
That would be a good thing to add to the list. And then I think the rest of my questions will probably land in the table. So thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments to anything not related to the draft framework, the dimensional standards, or the programmatic issues? Mr. Hyra?
We had a speaker, that presented in the beginning, in the public session, that asked us to be cautious and careful about these requirements, because it mostly will be by right, in a sense. And this reminds me so much. Didn't we have a table just like this when we did the T-zones, right? And we could just, take out accessory dwelling units and put the T-zones in, and we have these different columns, and we're thinking about all the same things, basically. And I know we have a lot of assumptions, what we think about what is manageable, doable, acceptable to us, to our neighbors. But let's just be honest that we don't really know. This is a theoretical exercise, which is fine. We should do this. And there's a reason that we're doing this. But let's just be thoughtful about how much we know and be honest with how much we don't know. And when we don't know and we're assuming, let's try to get data and information that can help us get a little bit more knowledgeable. Because I felt like with the T-zones, we didn't really know the price point. And we did some more research to get a price point. And we did the best research we could. And we now know that number was way off. It was 800,000. And then now it's at 1.2, 1.5 maybe. And I'm not saying we're shooting for affordability here. I'm just saying that we need to have as much information as possible and move cautiously and carefully as we do this. And we shouldn't pretend we know when we really don't. We may have a preference, but that doesn't mean we really know what the other people's preferences are or what we're going to really be doing. So let's just be careful, because once we set this, the market will determine it, and we'll be sitting up here and we'll be like, oh, we didn't like that structure. But it's within what we set. It's within the framework. So we are now setting the framework. Let's not rush it. Let's be thoughtful, and let's get as much data as we need until we really feel comfortable and confident before we set it in stone, because once we do it, we're done.
Well, and to that point, if I may interject, I mean, again, the other assumption that we should not have, in my opinion, we should not go in with the assumption that all of these need to be by right everywhere, no matter what. I mean, we're a small jurisdiction. There's not going to be an explosion of these. It would not, overburden our BZA or whatever body to review some of these in certain areas, in certain situations, where maybe we don't want to allow it automatically without a little bit of extra review to make sure that it's meeting, the standards that we expect. And that's because you're exactly right. Certain things probably should be by right, like interior. Someone wants to convert their basement to an accessory unit. That typically is a very, very low impact type of thing. Right now, technically, you can't even do that in the city. So that's like a fix. That's not even listed in the chart. I know we're mostly focused on exterior, but experience in the region bears out the fact that most people who have what meets the definition of an accessory living unit, it's interior to their house. They convert a basement, they build an addition for mom or dad or a family member Sometimes they prefer rental, but that's the overwhelming majority. Much fewer people do, and they're, do an accessory, like actual separate structure. It's more expensive. There are other reasons for it. So we shouldn't forget that part of this equation too. That needs to be in here, because right now we don't have any rules for that. And we want to allow that. So that's one thing. But we shouldn't just go in with the assumption. I know it's in the framework from staff recommending at this early stage to allow them all by right, but I think we need to be careful with that, because that to me is something that is, like I said, it sounds good, when you read some of the literature from certain national groups that are trying to promote big picture, policy agendas, which for the most part probably line up with a lot of what we want to see in Falls Church. But, when you distill it down to, the actual property here, we should look at it. So that's all I'm saying. So yes, I agree with you fully that, let's not go in with any assumptions of what you think it needs to be, regardless of what staff has teed up something, and that's great. And they've done a lot of research. It's very helpful. But yeah, absolutely, don't take any of it at face value. Dig into it, because if we don't, then we may have unintended consequences, and we still might. But if we do a little bit more homework, as Mr. Hira said, I think we have a bit less of a chance of that, and put in some checks and balances and safeguards to try to prevent that.
Sorry, can I just make one more point? I do want to compliment Jack on his presentation, because last time we heard this, it was only the merits, that this was good, and we should do it. And we mentioned there could be some unintended consequences, and some municipalities have done this and are really upset, and many of their populations are upset because it has changed the dynamic completely of certain places that have done Airbnbs or accessory dwellings, and you actually had that in the presentation, that there are things that we need to be mindful of as we move forward. So let's not think that this is going to be a solution to all of our affordable problems or any other thing that we're thinking about solving, and just be cautious and careful, because there absolutely will be unintended consequences, and municipalities that have implemented things close to what we're doing, some have been happy, but some haven't at all. So I'm glad you had that in your presentation. So thanks.
Yeah, so I generally agree with that. I mean, I think we certainly need to be careful. We certainly should learn from what we've experienced before. There are definitely some things I think we're going to want to know. We're going to want to know just about affordability. What do we know these are going for? We have lots of data, I'm sure, that we could figure out just how affordable they can be. I think we probably can guess that at a maximum 1,000 square feet, it's going to have some price point at some level, but yeah, some more precision there would be very helpful. But some other things I think we do know. It's, for me, this is about housing abundance too. More housing and allowing more units is allowing more houses. So there will be housing abundance to some level. I think a mix of housing types is something good. We can't do this now, so we'll have a mix of that. So there are some things that I feel comfortable knowing about. But we certainly should be digging deeper and get as much information as we can about those things that we can measure. And affordability is a clear one from that. Ms. Coleman?
I'd just add to that, I agree with you, and I would just add to that one of the goals that I have for this is ensuring that homeowners can maximize the use of their property to meet their own personal needs while not adversely affecting their neighbors. And I want that to be as easy as possible for them. I don't want to put up a whole lot of red tape. So I think we do need to be thoughtful about unintended consequences and what areas it should be in and all of that. But I'd rather that we try to write rules that we think are reasonable and allow homeowners the latitude to be able to make the highest and best use of their property. I don't want to be writing rules that we don't need to write. So that's sort of just my preference on this, and maybe not everybody on the committee agrees with me that should be a goal, but that is sort of my goal going into this process.
Any other big picture comments? Any principles?
I do. I agree with everything that you all have been talking about. Especially in terms of unintended consequences. I think the last thing that I think any of us wants to do is to allow a developer to just come in, take a property, maximize it, and then maximize the the accessory unit and maximize the disruption of the neighbors on either side and that whole neighborhood. I don't think that's on any of our desires, but I think it does take some time to kind of peel these layers apart, especially when we're talking about different types and different, some might be by right, some that are separate are going to have different regulations around those in order to kind of cordon that latitude off, right? Because some things are not going to be applicable for all types of those accessory units. And I'd rather see us be more clear on those regulations and see how it works out. And then if we need to loosen those as we see what's working, what's not, and give ourselves the flexibility of that. Because I think our neighboring jurisdictions, at least some of the ones that were indicated in the literature that was presented, they've only had these regulations on the books for 2 years, 3 years. And so it takes a while for people to figure out how to work the system, right? And once that ball is rolling, I think we're going to see a big change in the next 2 years in both those jurisdictions, which I think will be telling of how their particular set of regulations was written. I'm not suggesting we wait 2 years. To be clear, I'm not suggesting that. But I do think 6 months from now seems a little tight for us to work out all of that detail in the detached versus attached versus interior. So just be cognizant of all of that. So thank you.
The only question I would pose to all of y'all, I'm still forming my thoughts about this, and as I'm sure all of you are too, and we can all see both sides, all sides, however many sides there are, we can see them. I mean, the public meetings that we had at the library this summer were a good example of citizens talking to each other after Jack's presentation and Paul's and the other one about their differing views on this. I mean, it struck me as one of the first times that we'd had a serious policy discussion, mostly conducted by the people in the audience. Some of which were for this, some of which were not for this, some of which wanted to go faster, others wanted to go slower. At any rate, it was a very good public discussion. But what I'd be curious to hear from you all is, or what? If we don't do something, whatever this is that we are going to, tackle, what is Falls Church going to look like 25 years from now if we basically just kind of keep things the way they are? I mean, in my opinion, what we would become is a residential community of homes in the, by that time, $5-6 million range. Because houses like mine they're just going to be torn down, when I leave the scene. There's the market realities are what they are. I mean, or even today, you can sell your house for $1 million and just walk away from it. And before long, that's going to be $2 million. And is that the kind of community we want? There are some folks who be perfectly happy with that, because that would be a really upscale community for sure. Unless we do something with single-family neighborhoods that is as dramatic as what we've done with the multifamily buildings that we've built in the last 20 years, that is the future of Falls Church. And so I'd be curious to know whether that's okay or whether there's some other alternative that we could pursue.
I mean, I'll respond to that. I mean, that's obviously, you're taking a very big picture view here. I think I made this comment before. I mean, let's, again, bring it back down to what accessory dwelling units sort of have the ability to do or not do. Even if, I'm not even going to sort of say whether I agree or disagree with what the kind of the vision you just laid out, yes or no, but whatever that you want, whether you like the vision that Mr. Duncan just laid out, if we do nothing, so to speak, or you want something that's a complete opposite to what we have today, ADUs are not going to do that. They're not going to, this one housing type in and of itself is not that. So we have to be careful about that language because, it has become a hot button issue this idea about, undoing single-family zoning and that stuff. We got to be careful with that. That's not what this is, in my view. And I've worked with accessory dwelling units. We're still talking about single-family neighborhoods with an accessory unit. Accessory means something that's subordinate to the primary principal use. The principal use in R1A and R1B under this proposal, as far as I know, is still going to be a single-family detached dwelling is the primary use of that lot. This is talking about allowing some smaller secondary accessory unit to go along with it. So let's be careful about talking about changing the R1A, R1B and getting rid of single-family zoning in Falls Church. That kind of talk can get out of hand real quick, especially if it getting picked up in the public discussion. So let's be careful about that. I didn't sign up to take on that right now. I don't think we're talking about that. I don't think council is looking to do that either, as far as I know. But we are talking about allowing accessory units where today you're not allowed to have that. So, which are, again, a very small piece of a much bigger puzzle. And we're not going to be able to solve maybe that policy debate in this process. And let's just be careful about, taking that on, because that's not, that's how I think things can get out of control. Like we saw in T-zones where people kind of threw onto the T-zones whatever sort of their big cause was. Like, this is going to fix this is going to fix that, this is going to help this. It may not do any of that stuff. What it's going to do is what the ordinance says it's going to do. It's going to allow people to build a little thing in the backyard that a couple people could live in. Let's bring it back down to earth for a second, and not because if we use this as a surrogate for a big policy debate, we're going to get into trouble. And we got into trouble on T-zones. That's my opinion. So that's my caution, and my response to that is that's a very worthy debate that Mr. Duncan just laid out. I don't know if this zoning text amendment is where we're going to have that debate and settle that and fix that issue if you think it needs to be fixed. That's my 2 cents.
Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, just a brief kind of overall comment before we get into some of these details, and I hope we do get into them. I kind of view just the lot coverage by itself, 25%, building coverage maximum, 35% impervious. There aren't going to be many of these. We're talking about almost regardless of what we do, even if it's the most generous by right opportunity, I just don't see the numbers working out that a lot of people are going to jump in and do this. At the same time, I think if we continue to put a lot of restrictions, which is kind of what we have today, then we'll continue to get what we have today, which is no accessory dwelling units. And since I look at this as not solving affordable housing, I've never looked at it in that regard. It's simply, and it's really kind of echoing what Commissioner Comont has said, is to allow families to solve their problems on their property. And that's going to be a pretty limited set of folks that are going to do this. And yes, we should be careful and intentional and as best we can figure out what the implications are of what we recommend to be adopted. But if we're going to wait till we know 100% of exactly what's going to happen, then we're going to be waiting a long time, I think, because you just can't know that. You do the best you can. You learn from others, but you do have to make some trade-offs. So, enough of that.
I think that's a good segue actually into the framework. Because I agree with you. I think we have numbers here. We can actually start to map some of this out, right, and figure out where can this work, given the properties that we have. One other principle for me is there's an inherent problem with overly restricting them, because if you have a big lot, you might be able to fit this in there. If you have a big lot, you're probably a wealthier resident. So I want to make sure that we're not just doing something for the wealthiest of the wealthiest here, that we actually can do something that other families can benefit from, and not make it overly restrictive. So again, to Mr. Harris' point, don't know how that plays out. We can probably figure that out through some GIS mapping and other things that I don't know how to do anymore. So let's start with the draft framework, this first one on gross floor area. And throw it open for the commissioners. Anybody has any comments, thoughts on this?
I just asked staff for maybe you could walk us through how you arrived at the 1,000 square foot cap here as compared to the sort of what's recommended in the Senate bill. Why are we choosing 50% smaller?
Sure. So the 50% is what's on the books today. It's also in the Senate bill. The 1,000 square feet sort of tries to get at a couple things. We looked at, proportionality to the primary dwelling. We also looked at things like lot coverage, existing building coverage, and the impervious surface. We'll get into it in the director's report a little bit more in front of you. As analysis my colleague Zoe LaRive did that shows a really good kind of detailed breakdown about the current impervious surface coverage for specifically the detached single-family homes. And so looking at that, the older homes have, more pervious surface, or more allowance for impervious surfaces than newer built homes. And so thinking about, what those kind of trends are and how much, oftentimes you're looking at most 5, 6, 7 percentage points for impervious surface allowances. And so if you have about a 1,000 square foot cap, that allows a couple hundred square foot floor plate or base going up a story or two, arrives you at approaching 1,000 square feet. Again, considering and balancing some of the other considerations and concerns we heard with privacy, with lot coverage and tree canopy, some of the other environmental concerns. And so, like everything in here, it's a starting base point. Taking into all these considerations, we thought 1,000 square feet was a good kind of starting point for the conversation.
That's helpful, and I can't pretend to know what the right number is. My recommendation on all of this is let's talk to some of the people who are building these and some of the people who want to build these, and kind of try to understand what their needs are and whether those needs could be met with a cap as low as 1,000 square feet.
Sure.
I say that's low, but that's also maybe the size of a lot of the 2-bedroom apartments that we are building at Founders Row, and even the townhouses that we just approved are 1,500 square foot average. So, I'm not arguing necessarily for the 1,500 square feet, but just in general, my preference would be to give people more latitude rather than less.
It probably is a little bit more on the conservative side, but some would argue that if we want to be more cautious to begin with, that it may make sense to choose something in that range.
I'd like to note, if I could, if you just do the math, right? You just say, he said a two-story accessory dwelling. This is only in the scenario of a detached, right? Because I'll get to the interior in a minute. But if you just do the math on that, that's 500 square feet per floor. That's a 20 by 25 footprint. That's pretty large. And if you look at most of the lots in the city proper, a lot of the newer construction has already maxed out their coverage, right? So they're not going to be able to do a detached. You will have some of the larger properties that they'll be able to max that out, but I think it needs to be proportional to what the primary structure is on that property. So I think I like the fact that there's a percentage of the primary. I don't know if 50% is the right percentage, but I think 1,000 square feet is on the high side when you're talking about an accessory unit, which a lot of, and I appreciate the fact that you guys have had some public outreach already, and it sounds like there's a lot of interest more for a family member or for aging in place or for somebody, live-in care kind of thing. So to me, that is accessory. That is up to 2 people. That is not more than 2 people. And I feel like 1,000 square feet is verging upon 3 bedrooms. And do we really want that in? Does that make sense? If it's proportional to the size of that property and the size of that primary dwelling, then I probably won't have an issue with that. But if it starts to rival the size of that other primary structure, that's where I start to be concerned. Because then, how does that affect the neighbor? Because we're so tied up to that neighbor. And then when you think about it in terms of all of the newer development in the last, 5, 10 years, those those structures have kind of maxed out their area. They're like 3,000, 4,000 square feet. So you're looking at how do you define what is the accessory dwelling inside that unit? Where does that barrier? Do we care if it's somebody internal to somebody's own footprint and in their own space? I don't think we really should care about that. That's their own property inside their own structure. But I think we really should be concerned about it more on the detached. And then how do you explain that on the attached? Does it still maintain 1,000 square feet? Maybe if you still get your building lot coverage, I don't have a problem with that. Maybe 900 square feet.
I think 50% is maybe a little too high, because then that would mean you could have two structures the same size. So what's accessory to what? If it's 50%, I don't know. So I feel like, I don't know. To me, that might be, I'm sorry. No, I think my math is off.
Yeah,
it's getting late. So it'd be half the size. Yeah. It could work. I think other jurisdictions I've seen 40%. I mean, there are different ways you can do it. I mean, one thing also that I think is important that's not covered in here, it's not in the framework at all, but maybe it's when we talk about setbacks, we don't really talk about, you talk about side and rear and street line, but we don't really talk about sort of where on the lot, like we want someone building a little thing in their front yard if they had the room, if their house was set way back. I don't know, maybe we would, maybe we don't want that. Maybe that's not accessory. There's like a concept, like I said before, of like being clearly subordinate to it, in order to make it accessory. And so, I think like where it goes on the lot could be important to make sure that it truly, is what you think of when you think of it as something that's accessory. You think of the backyard, but we don't say that. Sometimes weird things can happen because people have a lot that would allow for something unusual that maybe we wouldn't want. So I don't know, 50% could be a little high, but it depends, I guess. But I guess as long as you have the cap, maybe it's fine, because you have the 1,000. Without that cap, you could have a very large, because our houses are quite big. But I guess with the 1,000 square foot cap, which is probably in the ballpark of where they could, like what it is. I think Fairfax caps it at like 800 square feet for an interior, except if it's the basement, like the entire basement, you can, we don't, it's fine. Even if the house is existing and the basement is 1,200 and you want to just have the whole basement be devoted to like an apartment interior, that's okay. But if you're building like an addition or somewhere else in the house, there's a cap, and I think it's 800. So, yeah, but that's probably in the ballpark.
Just a note for
this is where.
Sorry, just a note for commissioners on the audio, that the mics are directional, so if you can try to keep the mic a little bit closer and sort of speak sort of toward the mic or bring the mic around with you. Thank you.
That was my hearing. Yeah, that was one of my suggestions, one of my just, as we move forward, thinking about the different types, those three different types, the attached, interior, and the detached, they do strike me as very different, and they may have different thresholds for size. What it is, I still don't know, to Mr. Howard's point, but 1,000 square feet for a detached does seem large to me for the reasons Ms. Freelander mentioned. Just my gut. Any other thoughts on gross floor area? All right, let's plow through these then. So next one on attached, detached, allowed. This is self-explanatory, but any thoughts on this one? All right, how about height? Allow it, affordable dwelling unit height, accessory dwelling height maximum to be lesser of 20 feet or 1.5 stories. Let's go on.
Yeah, I have a question, because I think one common sort of form of these is the accessory dwelling being over the garage. So if it's limited to 1.5 stories, would that mean that the actual dwelling is just a half story, the whole thing? That's kind of a bummer. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to write special rules for garages. I know that's probably something that people in the community are going to be, maybe you already have garages that could be used that way. Maybe it's fine for it to be a half story, the whole thing. I don't know. I just wouldn't want to have to crouch in my personal accessory dwelling.
Does the garage level count as floor one?
No, that's not the question. The question is, does the accessory is the second story, correct? So, but that space would be sort of, I don't know.
Well, we
Maybe
do it by
you all-
headroom too, so it's like, it depends on the roof line. You know, we do it.
Yeah, I know they can do wonders with dormers all over,
Right.
but they can't put windows on certain sides. So, you know, I don't know. We're limiting things. So it just, again, like I want to give homeowners
And
flexibility.
some of that relates to setback though, you know, like the idea about how, to me, how high you might want something
To be proportional to the setback.
It's related to the setback. I mean, if somebody's meeting the requirement for the side yard, like, or this, you know, that the principal structure has to meet, well, then maybe they can go taller. But if we're talking about as close as 5 feet, which that's another line on here, which I don't necessarily, I think that might be too close, but then, yeah, then maybe it needs to be a little bit lower. You know, and that gets to some of our rules about accessory structures, like this opens up other cans of worms. I think one of the letters referenced, like how right now, I think we allow 3 feet for like sheds, you know? I don't know what the height limit is. I think you can go up to like 20 feet or something. 12, yeah, you can go pretty tall and be only 3 feet away, which is on for a shed. But anyhow, so so that's interesting. I think the height should factor into the setback. I mean, you know, maybe a 2-story structure could be fine, but if it would need to be further back.
I would agree with that. I think the height, my reaction was to tie it to the setback. So if it's 1 story, 5 feet, maybe I could justify that, although I'm open to hearing other thoughts on that. But if you're up to 20 feet, my reaction is we should consider a 10-foot setback. Just, you know, to have that 20-foot structure 5 feet from somebody's property, just.
That's the R1B setback, right? What's the R1B side yard? Isn't that 20, isn't that 10?
I think it's
10, yeah.
10.
Yeah, it's 10. So that would be an R1B, that would meet it. An R1A, is it 15?
I think it's, higher.
We're getting
15.
signals in the audience. Yeah, I think it's 15. So that's one idea, is that if you meet the setback for the district, you know, you could go taller. I mean, you know, because in that sense, you're as far back as the house could be at that point, which can go all the way up to 2.5 stories. So, so there's some argument, there's some logic there.
One thing that's important to remember is like this is in the rear yard, right? Like it's not like when we're talking about setbacks for the primary dwelling, like they're right up next to each other. So this is going to be not immediately adjacent to the neighboring structure, right? It will be in the rear of the property, most likely, if we're talking about detached units.
If you're on a corner lot, it'll be in somebody else, right next to somebody else's front yard.
Yeah, it will.
On a corner lot. It would
Corner lots of the garage that is close. Yeah, there's a bunch of them. You can drive around there everywhere, where the front door is on one
So
street
maybe
and then
we
the
have
garage is on
different-
another.
I mean, maybe there are different rules for corner lots then to address any adverse impacts there. I guess the other thing I just want to say is like we need, when we're thinking about setbacks, want to make sure that we're also thinking about the homeowner's ability to maintain the use of their yard. If you're requiring the placement of the structure to be so far in, then you've sort of removed use of the yard, right? So it's just another, again, in the interest of lobbying for flexibility for our homeowners.
So can I ask, keeping on the garage theme, it sounds like there might be some fair agreement on internal, you know, accessory units, so, okay. But in terms of disruption and change of landscape and so forth, seems like we'd want to encourage units above garages because the garage is already there. I'm just thinking of my neighbor's garage, which I'm used to. It covers up a certain amount of their yard. It's on the other side of my property line, so it's okay with me. I would be amenable to, you know, allowing a full ceilinged accessory unit on top of that garage if they wanted to build one, just because, like I say, I'm used to that being an occupied space in my head and in my field of view. Even a 25-foot wouldn't need to be that tall, but unit above a garage is still going to be shorter by a long shot than the mega house directly behind them. So my question, I guess, is how do other people feel about that? I mean, are garages like a category we want to encourage, units above garages? First of all, I'm envious of anybody who has a garage. But second, if you do have a garage, would you be willing to encourage accessory units on top of that by allowing whatever height is required to keep people from having to spend a third of their time crouching down in their accessory unit.
If I could, I don't think I'd take issue with people converting the space above their garage. I think what is important, again, is the height is proportional to the primary structure and the structures around it. But also, I think in the literature, when you say 20 feet, you're talking to the midline of the roof, which is really, if you're talking about a 20-foot structure, you're talking about an average additional 7 feet to the peak. That's a 3-story structure at that point. That's rivaling. Yeah, visually it is. And you could do creative things on the inside in order to have that usable space. But I would rather see something that caps the height to the peak, right? Or caps it to lower than the primary structure and adjacent structures. So it is supposed to be and read as an accessory unit. So I think it's possible, and there's opportunities in design for that. I don't think there's a one size, one way only to do a unit over a garage. And I've seen people convert their entire garage to, I won't say it's an accessory dwelling, but it's an office that has lots of extra stuff in it, amenities. So it's not quite there with the code to have the full kitchen, which is another thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about, like, how do you do the internal, right? Because you want to be able to allow for 2 full kitchens with those full-size appliances, right? And how do you do that life safety-wise with some kind of separation while still making it affordable for somebody to be able to do, which I think people are going to figure that out pretty quick when they want to convert something inside their house. But I think there's a lot of opportunity in the challenge that is presented with giving some parameters rather than just saying, well, let's make it easy for everything or easy for this one type of scenario. I think if we want to make sure that the massing is proportional. And I think that's more important than saying it can be up to 20 feet to the midline, or it can be up to 25 feet, which is actually another 7 feet, right? That's what you're going to see. That's what your massing is going to feel like when you're on the street. And I think it's important to show when we're presenting things to the public, again, to not show the bird's eye view that collapses the size of the primary structure so that you can't actually see that there's 2 or 3 stories in that. I think you need to show those perspectives from ground level, how people are actually going to perceive it. Because I think a lot of people might have seen those and said, oh, 25 feet looks really small. It looks like it's comparable to that house. But that house only had one window on the side wall, which was placed in the middle of that 35-foot height, which is not realistic. So, in that perception that, oh, this isn't really any taller than 1 story, I think that was a little bit skewed in some of those images. But that's what I really like to form it around massing and proportions when you're talking about an area, because I think every single situation is going to be a little bit different.
I guess
depending upon the structures that are there.
That's all good comments. So I'd ask staff to go around town and find me some garages that are just garages, and find me some garages that have, as Commissioner Friedlander said, already developed second stories, and let's just, do some measurings and see what that looks like and see how comfortable people are or are not with the notion that we might have more of those.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll keep this moving here. Just the staff does sort of talked about, like, as far as reusing existing structures, they kind of get at that with the idea about allowing a special permit from the BZA for existing structures that maybe don't meet whatever rules are adopted, but people still want to convert that to an accessory there's staffs, it appears staff in the framework is proposing a special permit from the BZA to do that. So if you had a garage that's today, whatever it is, and it's too close to the lot line based on whatever we or the council ultimately adopts, there'd be a process for them to still use that structure without having to tear it down and build something new. So there's some of that.
Is that a permanent allowance? It's not like it is now, which...
It looked like it, right. It was they were proposing to not have to, a permanent, like a special permit that wouldn't expire.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
We should keep
Anything else
moving.
on height? All right, how about on setbacks? There's a lot of language here, I don't have to read it all, but you want to describe this a little more, Jack, before you...
Sure. So, I think with the setbacks, with this, we had flexibility for the homeowner in mind. Obviously, 5 feet is less than what's allowed for a single-family home. It's a little more than what's allowed for accessory structures, as we covered, which is 3 feet. We heard, wanting some flexibility from homeowners, from this commission, from council. This was also the most voted on the dots on the open house meetings. So that we went with those kind of recommendations here. For the public street right-of-way, this we might want to take a closer look at this. It is common to have, for accessory dwellings in particular, in order to encourage them to be in the rear yard without perhaps explicitly saying so, having some required buffer distance for a detached accessory dwelling from any street. And then the others were, kind of driven again by kind of proportionality and privacy concerns for windows. I know that gets a little tricky when discussing sort of these more specific design, perhaps architectural considerations, but that's where I came from the 10-foot setback without allowing windows on the anything higher than the first floor story. Was, I think, largely driven by privacy concerns from an accessory dwelling built on the 5-yard setback with a window kind of looking over their neighbor. Perhaps there's a fence, maybe there's not. So I think we had kind of privacy in mind there. For the others, these were kind of ongoing conversations, and of course everything is still very much an ongoing conversation, but with the building code, having some, obviously you need some setback or distance from any two buildings on the same lot. I think Arlington might have an 8-foot, other places have 10 feet or more, kind of depending on the size, and some other design considerations for the accessory dwelling and the principal dwelling. So,
in your mind, though, what's that 8 feet? What's that trying to accomplish as opposed to 10 feet or 12 feet?
Yeah, I think 8 foot was getting closer to like the minimum separation for the building code.
Stuff. There's like
Fire code.
There's like fire code, like if the buildings are too close, you need like special fire ratings. You can't have windows. There's like certain fire code things kick in when they're within a certain distance from each other.
Thank you.
The 500 feet, I guess you took that from the proposed state bill, which, just again for the record, that state bill was tabled to this year. I don't know where it's, the Senate bill rather, I don't know where it's going. No one knows really what'll happen in the next session. So we shouldn't like hang our hat on that. Not a lot of jurisdictions around the state, some are okay with it, others are not. It was proposed by a Fairfax County senator. Some people are in favor of it, some are not. So we shouldn't hang our hat on that. If it happens and it sort of takes it out of our hands, it's like, so be it. But but I feel like, if we think that's going to happen, then we shouldn't be wasting our time. If they're just going to overrule us and kind of say to the whole state, is what you got to do. I don't know where it's going to go. I just know there's some large jurisdictions around the Commonwealth that are opposing that, not because they don't want affordable dwelling, or, sorry, see, I confused the two, accessory dwelling units, but just because taking away local control and trying to have a one size
Kicks
fits
in if we
all.
don't pass our own.
Yeah, one size fits all, yeah, that kind of thing, so, anyway. But the 500 feet is probably, we would, I mean, I don't know if any, that wouldn't really mean anything here because our lots aren't that big, so it'd be, yeah, that might, that, everyone would meet that. So if we want to have a minimum or maximum separation, it needs to be a smaller number than that. And I don't know if we even do. I mean, if we have, I think our lots are small enough that with the proper setbacks, practically speaking, it would never be that far away that it would be an issue. Like that comes in more on big lots where you have like an acre or something, and it almost looks like someone wants to build the accessory unit like way far away. Maybe it is on a corner and it has like its own driveway and it starts to look like you just subdivided it and it looks like two houses. And if you don't want that, the maximum distance starts to be important, or the minimum, maximum distance. But it may not matter for us. We may not even need that.
Thoughts on setbacks on this side?
Yeah, I have two questions. One on the 25 feet from a public street right away. Is that present an issue for corner lots? I'm not sure really what the depth of corner lots are, but yeah, in order to place, does it make it so that it's not possible for corner lots to have accessory structures? Accessory dwellings?
I'll defer to.
Oh, so we had done an analysis years ago. And I don't recall the numbers, but it was a striking percentage of the city's corner lots that were actually non-conforming. So back when the city put the double frontage rule into effect, it rendered most of the corner lots non-conforming. That they had been subdivided and platted under one set of rules. The homes were built, and then the rules were changed, and all the rules were in the required front yard setbacks on one side or the other. So some of this is that on corner lots are always sort of an interesting case because they don't really enjoy the same privacy that every lot does. And so I think the flexibility around allowing sort of a difference in the front yard setback from the principal structure is actually in part to accommodate that if you do have a house that's set back very deep, you don't want to sort of penalize them for having that deep set lot so they can actually use the front of the lot. Or if they have a corner lot, they can make use of what maybe looks like a side lot from the side, but is actually part of a front yard. So that's the reason for specifying that number.
Okay, so sorry, I didn't hear it in there. It sounds like they would be possible for corner lots. I mean, depending on the depth of the lot.
Yeah, the intent is to make it possible. Some of it is just a function of where the house happens to sit on the lot.
And how deep the lot is, right?
Right.
Yeah. It just seems to me like maybe there's some special considerations for corner lots that we might want to consider in the code, because it's come up twice now.
Before you go on, we need a motion to continue.
Oh my gosh, is it already
past
10:30?
I move to continue this illuminating discussion past 10:30 till 11 o'clock.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. And then the only other thing I wanted to ask about is the no window restriction. I've toured a couple of these, and some of them have windows where you can't actually view directly out or down, but you can kind of view up, and it brings light into the structure. So if there is a way to describe windows that are that variety, again, in the interest of offering people nice places to live, because they're going to live in these, I want to have that flexibility in
And
there.
if the setback is good, maybe we don't even need that. Like if it's setback far enough from the property line, appropriately, whatever, maybe you don't need to have a restriction on having a window, on that side, because, like I said, it's Falls Church. We all kind of live on lots that are kind of close to neighbors. I mean, if you want total privacy, you're probably not living here. I mean, real privacy. If you really want to be secluded and be a hermit,
Go to Clifton.
yeah. So, I think if we get the setbacks right, I think that's normally, that's my opinion, is that people are usually more concerned about the looming feeling you get by a taller structure right at the line or close to the line. If it's far enough back, it's not always so much the window, that's going to bother people. So if we get the setback right, I'm sure we'll have a lot of discussions on that. And that when we may not need like that kind of a restriction.
How about lot coverage? Pretty straightforward, compliance with the existing standards. To Mr. Stevens' point earlier, it does seem pretty restrictive, right? I mean, just
But I think one of the good things about it is and I think Commissioner Friedlander said this earlier, it's probably going to be the older, smaller properties that are going to work here. And that's good, because this is a way to preserve those properties. I think it's one of the intentional positive side effects of ADUs, is give people the opportunity to maintain that old house, put in an accessory unit for their needs, their family needs or whatever, and that way they don't have to sell their lot to a developer and clear cut it and build up to the maximum, so.
But can you explain that? So if it's, how do you mean? So if it's a smaller lot with 25% max?
And you've only used
10 or 15.
20 or 15.
Yeah.
You've got room
You
to,
haven't built out a large home to the max.
Not the lot necessarily, the house itself.
Yeah.
the house, that's right.
I'd like to say something to that. I actually agree with you on that, in that I think it allows, especially for the older properties and the older structures, it allows those mature trees to stay, rather than those to be clear cut and then put in a little dinky new tree. But you can also, I think, in that scenario, you also want to address how does the attached look. I mean, it's still going to be the same lot coverage, right? So long as you're meeting the lot coverage and the setbacks, I think whether you have a detached or an attached, it's pretty much the same. Just to kind of go back to the setbacks for just a minute, it would be helpful in the discussion to see what the setbacks are currently, kind of visually, right? And then how that affects, what the proposal is for the accessory dwelling unit. I think it would be good to know what are those setbacks right
For the
next
principal
to.
dwelling?
Yeah, for the principal dwelling, right next to what the proposed setbacks are. Because I think it's a little too premature to kind of split hairs over, should it be 5 feet, should it be 10 feet, should it be 8 feet? It's hard to know that until, again, I think it's a proportional discussion. Thank you.
Anything else on the dimensional pieces, kind of before we jump into the policy stuff? Let's keep plowing ahead then. So in terms of programmatic standards, the idea is to allow this in R1A and R1B districts only. Reactions or thoughts on that?
I mean, my thought, I've said this before, I think on non-conforming, I think with, non-conforming lots, I don't know if it should be by right. I think in my neighborhood, my part of town where, Ellison Heights, where the lots are a lot of non-conforming older lots that are narrow and small, and there are some other parts of town like that, that it's more problematic there. Because because the lot sizes themselves are so small. I mean, in some cases, meeting the setback requirements might preclude it anyway, and the lot coverage might preclude it. But I think that if we're going to allow them by right, and I'm not sure if I'm even there yet on the detached to allow them by right, but if we were even going to go there, and maybe we only allow them by right in R1A, I don't know, then you have to have an otherwise conforming lot, I think, in my opinion. You should have a lot that's already meets the lot area and lot width requirements for the district that it's in my opinion, because if it's an undersized lot, it introduces, challenges and it kind of, and that maybe could benefit from a little bit additional scrutiny and review through a BZA process. To look at that and see, if it works or not. There may be lots that are just slightly undersized, and it's no problem.
Are you talking about accessory dwellings?
Detached.
Across, or detached specifically, okay.
Yeah, the interior, those could be by right anywhere, yeah, in my view. And if it's in the, an interior, and actually we'll have to get the semantics right. I mean, between interior and attached, it can get very confusing. We should probably just have either it's detached or it's not. Otherwise, we get into trouble with like interior versus attached. I've encountered that in Fairfax. Like, if it's part of the house, it's part of the house. Meaning, if it's part of the, the conditioned space of the principal dwelling, then in my opinion, it's inside the dwelling. Even if you have to walk through, if it's not a breezeway's outside, so that's maybe not attached. But if it's within the conditioned space, so we'll have to work on that. It's a separate discussion. But I think having only two categories is a lot cleaner. It's either part of the principal or it's detached. Anyhow, but for detached, I think that unless you have a lot that's conforming lot, that maybe it shouldn't be by right, in my opinion. That's kind of my view. If you do, then perhaps it could work. I still need to think about that more, because I do think that, there's some, I don't know, I think there's some benefit to a special permit process, but certainly if you have an undersized lot, like in my neighborhood, and it's hard to see that, allowing them by right would be wise. And I don't know, and I haven't crunched the numbers and looked to see if how feasible it would even be. For a lot of folks, it wouldn't be feasible anyway, but anyhow, yeah, that's my opinion on that.
Thanks. Anything else on location? How about parking?
Okay, this one I really want to hear what you think about. So in terms of, disruption to the force, changing the feel of the neighborhood, to me, the extra car for the person who's living in the accessory unit is more disruptive than the looming of the building or any of the other things we've talked about before, because that car has got to go somewhere. And most people, let's just face it, are probably still going to have a car who are in dwellings like this. So maybe I'm influenced by the fact that I have a shotgun driveway and no parking allowed in front of my house because there's a stop sign. But if I wanted to build one of these things, that car would have to go out on the street. And that affects my neighbors, and I'm on a wide street, West Street. If I were on Marshall Street or whatever, we spend so much time worried about fire accessibility, these new things we're building, but try to get a fire truck down Marshall Street, when both sides of the street are parked. I mean, it's really a challenge just to get a regular car down there sometimes. So I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what people think about no requirements at all for parking? Not at all?
I'm a strong supporter of no requirements for parking. I don't think it's a safe assumption that everybody is going to have a car in these necessarily. Maybe some will. I'm also a strong proponent of the belief that our streets are public spaces and should be used for public purposes, and if there are parking issues, we can institute permit programs. We've done that in other areas of the city. So, I don't think we should be requiring people to build parking and pave over perhaps previously impervious surfaces in their yard to create parking spaces for these things that may not even be needed. So no, I don't. I strongly support the no off-street parking required. I'd also say that if Marshall or other streets are so narrow that a fire truck cannot traverse them, maybe we need to look at whether parking should be permitted on both sides of the street. Cars are getting bigger overall.
Yeah,
so,
really,
that's an issue. These are other issues that I don't think we want to manage the number of cars necessarily that are parked on the street to aid the fire trucks. Through this, I lost my point. But
well, your solution is permit parking. If the neighbors are agitated, permit parking.
Got it. Yeah.
Permit parking if the neighbors are, really agitated.
Yeah, address
and just assurance that, access to emergency vehicles is going to still be possible. And particularly in neighborhoods like Greenway Downs and other places where the streets are narrower. I don't know. To me, it's just something we ought to take into consideration because a street feels different. I'd be in favor of a bike lane over double-sided parking on some streets because the streets really aren't wide enough to support parking on both sides, in my opinion. And some of those, depending on their lot sizes, houses don't really have much in the way of parking, on the property itself. They're already relying on street parking for their second car.
Yeah, one of the benefits of street parking is its traffic calming effect. So I think there can be good things about having, cars parked on the street.
I hear this point. I do strongly associate myself with Ms. Coman on this one. And, it's not the only thing, but it is one way to keep the costs down. But, if we do care about affordability, it's not the only thing, but it does drive up the cost. So, and given that if we're restricting it to R1A or R1B, the vast majority of the city does not have parking challenges, I think. So I think we have lots of spaces to accommodate it all throughout the city. Ms. Friedlander?
I'm actually in agreement with the no off-street parking, I'd be curious too, because a lot of the literature that I've been reading too, not just what you guys have sent, but it would be great to kind of see the studies of how has this worked in Portland? What was the overall impact on automobiles for each of these types of accessory dwelling units? I think that would help us to kind of see that data and say, instead of it being, I'm for it, I'm against it, like, let's look at some data and really kind of evaluate, like, what, because a lot of places in Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, they've all, and granted, they're urban areas, we are a little city. We have to remember that. We're not a rural community. So I think it's important to kind of look at that data, especially in a region that has a lot of public transportation available.
Great. I mean, just food for thought. I actually, believe it or not, don't have a super strong opinion on this one. But I would say things to consider that we can think about. For example, I think it also makes a difference whether or not the existing principal dwelling is meeting the minimum parking requirement, which is, I guess, what is it, one space? What does a single-family house require?
One space.
One space.
I guess most houses are meeting that. So the question's like, do they, so the question, one way, if we did require a spot for an accessory unit, one option would be to say, and this might not be a popular option with this crowd, but, you're required to provide it. If you don't have it or don't want to, again, you can go through a special permit process to modify that standard, have the BZA modify that standard, and then someone is looking at, well, where is it? Is it on a street where this is going to cause a huge headache, or, yeah, there's no problem because there's plenty of parking. Just an idea. I don't know, it'll be a popular idea, but that's one option to, you have certain standards that if you meet them, you're by right. If you want to waive or modify those standards, you got to come in for a special permit and have the BZA and staff take a look at it and see if it works.
We're in the idea phase. This is good.
Yeah,
It's time for all
just an
this.
idea, just food for thought.
This is good. Another one I think is potentially contentious here is the short-term rental with no immediate change. But I think the point being made that we don't really have citywide policy that governs this. Is that right, Mr. Trainer?
That's correct.
Policy is we allow it, right?
It's happening.
It's not regulated. Sir?
So this is just a kick the can down the road. We're not going to deal with it here.
Not for accessory dwelling specifically.
Well, to your point earlier, I wouldn't say it's kicking the can down the road. I think it's, sort of similar to your point earlier that if short-term rentals are sort of a concern in the community, then we can regulate short-term rentals versus trying to sort of shave off short-term rentals specifically within the context of ADs.
But I think we need to think about it. I mean, that if we allow short-term rentals with these units, it will change the character of our neighborhoods. So
absolutely,
we do have to think about it. We shouldn't kick it down the can. I mean, maybe we then have a citywide policy on it, or maybe we have a policy restricted to these type of units, but we need to consider this. We should not have this policy without changing our short-term rental policy in some way. Because as much as people might get upset about the parking or about heights and seeing things where they once saw trees, now they're seeing a building, to see somebody move fast in their neighborhood, come in for a short amount of time, leave, that disrupts things. I mean, and we know this. So,
well, I know it. I lived in a place that had it, and it definitely changed the character of that neighborhood. So,
yeah.
For better or worse?
In what way? Yeah, you and I have talked about this a lot, but was it, the noise, the nature of the clientele? Was it the traffic? I mean, my opinion is that if we allow Airbnbs, the kind of people who would come to Falls Church would be families who would drive their car and park here and take the metro downtown. It's not going to be, frat house city USA, which goes back to my concern about parking, because I think very few of those people are going to take public transit
There's
to
a
Falls
difference
Church.
between people who are renting, let's say, for 6 months or longer. They're part of the neighborhood. They have ownership in that neighborhood. If you're in for a day or two, you're there to enjoy yourself. And I'm not saying everybody who does that necessarily creates a problem, but I certainly observed that there were a lot of people who wanted to take full advantage of the flexibility that allowed. In addition, I think the short-term rental kind of undermines the affordability issue. I think a lot of jurisdictions that have done this have seen the value of their real estate go up, and it makes their housing even that less affordable. So this is one that gives me a lot of heartache. So
We already have them. I'm looking at Airbnb right now. I'm not going to call out specific addresses on the record, but we have some right now. We have some right now, the people that are doing it. So we probably are overdue for regulating them. I don't know. I mean, I guess the city would know more if we've gotten complaints from neighbors about these things. That I know in Fairfax, there was a period of time where, I mean, it's still a hot button issue, but the county was kind of forced to regulate it. There was some state legislation, and then they were able to, they put in some it requires an administrative permit. It doesn't require a special permit or any public hearing, but there's a registry, and you have to, provide certain information. You pay taxes on it. There's a fee. We're probably past due for regulating it. I don't know how many. I mean, just on Airbnb, we already have a handful, in town. Some of which may be illegal ADUs. Just looking at some of them, because they appear to have kitchens and separate things. But anyhow. So we're probably overdue, and considering that according to the dot thing you guys did, it sounded like that was an issue that's actually surprising to me that's what people latched onto, but that's how these things work. Sometimes things you don't expect people turn out to be what people are really concerned about. So I don't think it would be, I think we need to have a plan at least. If we're not going to address it directly, I think maybe that's advice to council that they need to kind of as a follow-on to this say, we're going to figure this out, and then immediately after, we're going to look at short-term rentals and try to get some reasonable legislation on them and limits on what you can do. In Fairfax, they limit things like how many days of the year you can rent it, or nights rather, and other things like that. There's certain requirements. It has to be owner-occupied. Can't be like a full-time, essentially like a little rental hotel. So anyhow, I think that's a different discussion with a different draft framework, but I don't know, if we could just, say we're not going to deal with it now. I think we need to say, if that's the consensus that it actually is something that is, and this would introduce more of them. I don't know how much more this would introduce, but it might, some number. I don't know how significant it would be. So I think we should at least have a good answer of okay, to people who say, well, what are you going to do about that? And say, well, we're going to work on that next.
So it does strike me as positive that needs to be part of this conversation. It seems really hard to not have it be completely enveloped in this part.
So you're voting against? I mean, would Planning Commission vote against allowing Airbnb situations and accessory dwellings? I mean, or do we just remain silent on it and ask for a process to deal with the larger issue?
What did we?
I feel like it's a bigger conversation, and this is part of it, and this is impacted by it. But, one of the arguments for allowing it is that it opens up the opportunity to build these to more people because you can earn your money back. I mean, it may take 6 years, as a speaker said earlier tonight, but that is one way that you could do that. Capping the number of days seems like a reasonable approach to me. Maybe you start out with a low number of days and we see how it goes. I don't know. But I agree with staff that as much as I would like to be able to say something here, it's sort of a bigger issue that the city needs to address. And I don't feel personally like it's an issue that should be holding up this process. I don't feel like it's a deal breaker to us sort of moving forward here, personally.
I
think they're related, but I hear your point.
I hear your point, and I understand that. My concern, too, though, is we also have to project out after that property gets sold, right? Then what is the I think there is going to be there is going to be the potential for somebody, even if we, because the next one is ownership. And, we're saying on the next thing in the table that each established owner occupancy requirement for either the primary or the accessory. And I think that's a great idea because that helps. You're not going to want to do an Airbnb with somebody and not have control over it if it's in your in your purview, right? And you're also being held accountable to your neighbors and all of that. But I think what can happen, and you see this happening in other jurisdictions, that people might want to have several properties and they can't owner occupy every single one. So then what happens? You've got a rental Airbnb house and a rental ADU. A primary and an accessory dwelling unit. So I think it is a conversation that we do need to be having in this that's going to help form a bigger policy change. But I think we can't just table it and say, let's not worry about it right now. I think we really have to start thinking about ideas around that and how it can affect this so that then that can then be kind of decoupled, right, from this. And that other policy is being worked on in tandem with this. Because I think that's the only way to really address it. Because I would not want to go through and get to the final stage and to say, well, we're going to table it. Because then we're allowing something out of the floodgates and we still don't have a way to handle what clearly right now, in public opinion, they're concerned with. And I think we really have to address that.
I think I agree with this too. Let's stick with that then and move on to ownership and occupancy then. There were some good materials in our packet on this very subject. So it's tough one for me. I'm not 100% sure how I feel, but any thoughts on this one? Okay with it.
I'm opposed to including any owner occupancy. I was the one who shared the Brookings article. There are multiple negative effects of them. I feel like I liked the way the Brookings article phrased it. It's kind of like a lazy way of enforcing your codes, your noise ordinance, or and I think it also is sort of an uncharitable assessment of renters as being sort of lesser than homeowners. So I kind of want to get at the root of like why we think this is a good idea. Like what was the sort of rationale for including these ownership requirements?
Like a lot of things, they're dependent on the other recommendation. So part of the consideration, and as Ms. Friedlander noted, without having a short-term rental policy, you open up the possibility of Airbnb and having short-term rental of both properties. Again, it's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility.
How is it going to be enforced, though? I guess that's my question. Like, could we just say no short-term rentals rather than having an owner occupancy requirement? We could just say, you can't do short-term rentals in both of the properties, like the primary and the principal and the accessory dwelling, rather than having this owner occupancy requirement, because it is limiting, for people who maybe want to sort of like move up the property ladder. So, and again, my feeling is less rules are better here in general. So when it comes to people's personal property rights. So those are my feelings on it, but I don't support it.
I'm the opposite camp. I think that having the owner occupancy requirement for one or the other is good. As was said before, I think the majority of people who are going to want to take advantage of the ADU situation is going to be for family members or others, or or maybe it's an older person who wants to stay in their house and they're going to rent out part of it and stay in the other. I think otherwise, if we're allowing both to be rentals, then it's just kind of like, allowing an investor to now kind of just tack on additional profit and in a rental house, which is, if for a normal, rental, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. And actually, you're not allowed to restrict rentals under 30 days. So it's not that we're against rentals. We have lots of rentals in town, and I think it's more the idea that, with owner occupied and one or the other is kind of like more in my view, what the intent and the purpose of allowing these are, the accessory dwelling units, is that you're helping out an owner have more flexibility, as you said. Otherwise, if they're both rentals, then you just kind of, it's just kind of like in my view, it's a giveaway to an investor at the expense of the people who live there full time around it. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I read the Brookings piece too, and I get it, and I understand some of the, the feelings about renters. It's not even about that, at least the way I view it. But there is some evidence that owner-occupied properties can be better maintained versus property that's owned by an investor. And they're there every day. They see it every day. They're there. They can see if there are problems. Like if you have a tenant in your ADU, you're there to see the problem, and it's easier for neighbors to kind of have someone they could go to chat with if there was an issue, as opposed to trying to find out who owns the property and where they are. And I don't know. That's my opinion. I don't know what the consensus will be, but I like that. I like staff's recommendation there. I would support that.
I think the issue is not necessarily renter versus owner. It's about neighborhood stability. And there are many different ways to ensure neighborhood stability. So I think that's the issue. And if you have turnover, you are disrupting the neighborhood. So how do we prevent turnover? Do we have a regulation about how long people need to be in here? Do we have an ownership occupancy requirement with the primary? I don't know. I'm not saying I know which is right, but I'm saying we have a sense that going the route where we're going without regulating it could be problematic. So we got to figure out the right regulatory tool. But it should not be no regulatory tool, because we know there are going to be issues. The other thing is one thing about who's living in the house, there's another, or the dwelling, but there's something about institutional investors. And we want to make sure, I think, that we regulate this so that we don't have absentee landlords, that we have people who buy into this community, whether they're renters or owners. So I'm using buy not as in they have to have a mortgage, but they're coming here because they want accessibility to our amenities, they want to be part of our school, they want to go to our restaurants. But institutional investors don't care about that at all. They want to increase the bottom line, the rate of return. We have seen the homeownership market that went into foreclosure then go into the rental market, and it is creating havoc for our country. We are in a rental crisis because a greater percent of our housing stock is owned by institutional investors that only care about the bottom line. We don't want to contribute to that. I don't want that to be any part of this. So we can regulate this to keep them out. And having one of these structures owner-occupied is potentially a way to do that. So again, I'm not saying I have the answer, but we can already anticipate some problems that could come, and we should make sure that we address them with whatever tool we all agree with. But we should not say, oh, let's just do nothing, no regulations, let's just let something happen, because we're going to let something happen, and we're going to be very disappointed in what happens. So we just need to be cautious and careful.
How does an owner-occupied deal work here in Falls Church, where we have so many people who are state or defense who, they buy the house and maybe they build an accessory dwelling, and then 3 years later they get stationed to Middle East and they gotta go. They don't want to sell their house because they want to come back when their kids are in high school, hopefully, in their next tour duty. And so the house is rented for 3 years to somebody else, and then the accessory dwelling would be what? Become illegal? Or, I mean, how as a practical matter, how does an owner-occupied requirement
They couldn't rent that to another party, I guess. They couldn't rent the accessory.
During their absence, they could not rent.
I guess,
So you would
yeah.
you would run the risk of displacing somebody who was in the accessory unit who might want to stay because the person who owned the primary house had to, because of work requirements, leave temporarily.
I'm also unclear on how it's enforced. I mean, what role does the city play in private lease agreements between landlords and tenants, if any?
Not sure about lease agreements, but zoning complaints are on a kind of as
So it could be in a
notified
situation where
basis.
somebody's taken possession of a property and is renting it, and the city would come in and kick them out?
Well, someone complained. It's
Because
complaint
somebody
driven.
complained that
Well, they
they were
wouldn't kick them
double
out.
renter? I just don't,
usually
that's a bad
fine,
look, guys.
warn.
Like, I don't think we want to be in that situation.
Well, like any other zoning issue, if someone complains, the zoning inspector investigates and they get issued a violation, they have to then remedy the violation. Yeah, I mean, whatever. You know, if
By
they know-
leaving the property?
Well, if they knew the rules when they went into it and then they knowingly violated that, they took the risk.
I mean, the homeowner would be the one to have knowing, but the tenant would be sort of an innocent victim.
It's unfortunate, yeah, if that were to happen. But
Yeah, I mean, an analogous situation, we often run into this in the retail bays and special exception processes, right? Where, a small business signs a lease and they go to get their certificate of occupancy, and then we tell them that they're in violation of the SE requirement, and then we have a special exception amendment filed to redo the retail conditions on the ground floor, right? This would be a similar situation, right? Someone enters into a lease, and then they move in, and then they're told they're not allowed to, and then you've got a real awkward situation on your hands. So it is very difficult, I think, on a practical level to
it actually,
enforce.
it speaks to a good point though, even if we allow these by right, I mean, it speaks to the idea that, they're required to get some type of administrative permit, I mean, because sometimes, maybe it would get picked up in the residential, that's like the next one, but
Yes.
they need a way to inform folks about what the rules are, so they know, even if it's by right, they need to know what the rules are, so they know, like, for example, the State Department example, so they know that if they're going to proceed and spend the money and invest it and build it, that there may be an issue when they're not there, where they're not unable to rent it during that time, so they know what they're getting into, I think,
So something that has been cropping up a lot in the staff conversations, I guess, are a couple things. One, under equal protection, you got to treat similar things similarly, right? You can't have one set of rules for one type of residence and an entirely different set of rules for the same type of resident. You'd have to have some explanation of why they're different, why you're treating them differently. The other thing that's been flagged is that a lot of the things that we're sort of talking about as possibilities are probably already happening, right? So there are already Airbnbs, people are already renting out rooms within their houses. And so one of the things that staff, the question we keep asking ourselves is sort of, would the ADs be sort of materially different from how things are already happening within the city, whether someone's renting out a basement or they're renting out a couple extra rooms on their second floor, or whatever the case may be. For example, we actually designed the railroad cottages so that you could accommodate a caretaker in the second floor with their own full bath. It's been part of our constant conversation.
I believe we
One more
need
comment on this,
to
and we'll move on to the next.
extend the meeting.
Oh,
You've hit your 11 o'clock mark.
we're almost.
God, I don't want to be the one to.
Okay, yeah, it's your birthday, Derek.
If you stick it out another 56 minutes,
We only have three.
hooks off, no
three
longer your
left.
birthday.
Do we need,
I know.
or what?
15
what do you-
minutes.
15 minutes?
Okay,
So 11:20?
I'll extend a motion to extend, or I propose a motion to extend the meeting 15 minutes.
Second.
Tough crowd.
Take them in, Ms. Belmont, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay,
last comment on
just real quick, I'll be real quick, because I know we're going to move forward. In terms of I think this speaks to the whole short-term rental, long-term rental ownership, right? And I almost feel like maybe it's saying that you can't have two short-term rentals on the same property, right? Because if you've got a long-term rental, let's use the State Department as a good example, right? That State Department family is renting out their house, right? And if somebody's in that dwelling, they're almost grandfathered in. They're still, their agreement is still with the primary owner of that property. And if it's a short-term rental, I don't think you can, I don't think you could do a short-term rental when you have a long-term renter on that property, because that person is not there to do the maintenance. That person is not responsible for whatever's happening. That person is then calling overseas and saying, you have a problem with your short-term rentals, Airbnb, and then we're back to the zoning problem. So I feel like this whole thing kind of, again,
It connects.
Yeah. And it needs to be developed in tandem. And then if we need to decouple it, knowing what our tandem policy is going to become, then that's when we decouple it. But I think we still have to keep them together.
Good. Let's take these last two together then on existing buildings and the approval. Additional thoughts on this one?
I think the existing building things is good. I think we should have a process, it goes to the BZA, and they can decide if it's appropriate to allow somebody to use an existing structure, if it would cause any impacts, or if they need to maybe plant some screening, and then it would be okay, and they can, even though it's too close.
The idea being that they may not have gone through this process.
Yeah, it gives people the option and go through, to go through a reasonable process and show that it won't cause an impact on their neighbors if they're allowed to use it, even though it doesn't meet the rules, for a new ADU. I think it's good. I like it as it is. I like that. It's good.
And it would still be used in conjunction with the approval with building department review of life safety and all of that. I'm good with that. Can we go back to occupancy? I know we skipped over it.
We did, you're right.
It's so skinny up there. Again, I think in terms of occupancy, I'm sorry, I thought we were done with if we're done with existing accessory buildings.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay.
Clock is ticking.
For occupancy, so
Be fast.
it's an accessory. Primarily, we're looking at owners wanting to age in place. I think it's a supportive element to that primary residence or vice versa, right? If you're aging in place and you're using the smaller thing, I think it really should be capped at 2. I don't think it should be 3 and up, because then you start getting into a single family unit.
And I would just add to that, not to scare people, but our definition of what we allow in a single family unit, families related by blood or marriage, any size. But for unrelated people, you can have up to 8. You can have 8 unrelated people living in a house. Now, I don't know if you'd ever have an ADU with 8 people in it, unrelated. It'd be kind of crowded, but currently that's what it says in our ordinance. So if we say the same as the principal for household size, you can have 8 unrelated. We may not want that. Yeah, I agree. We may not want that. I mean, but I don't know necessarily if a family should be precluded. If it's just like a couple with a baby, maybe that's okay. I don't know, but maybe there should be a reasonable limit, something less than 8, which is what we would allow in the principal for unrelated people.
This one gets me actually into uncomfortable territory. This one where I'd like to know more on it. Like, what have been the experiences of other places on this one? This is not what I had thought about before. And I don't know about regulating this one. Sounds.
Yeah, I wonder where it comes from, because in Fairfax, you're only allowed to have 4 unrelated people. And above which, that's the limit. So I don't know how we had 8. And I don't know what's right or wrong or where it comes from. If there's any state guidance on that, but check into that. Look into it.
Yeah, that's something that we had conversations with building official and zoning folks, that we had those conversations about regulating what a family is, and it's something to be careful about for sure. So definitely something we're looking into more and appreciate feedback on.
I don't know if this is the genesis of it, but years ago, decades ago, some of the really big old houses in town were being looked at for institutional use or group home kind of type use. And so we wanted to actually encourage single-family homes, which were falling down, not well maintained, to be used as homes for multiple unrelated people who had special needs of some sort. I don't know if it's just odd that we have 8 and Fairfax has 4. There's got to be some reason in our history that caused that.
In the interest of moving this along, any other comments on this? Let's wrap this up here. I think we've covered a lot. I think staff, Jack, this is the kind of feedback you were looking for.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's a very thoughtful conversation. Tons of expertise up here, which I really appreciated too. So, Ms. Freelander.
It's not on the table. Can I add it?
Please.
Or just something to think about adding to the table, and that is how are we mitigating stormwater runoff, all of that yummy stuff and infrastructure that we've been talking about. I think, if there's ways to incorporate sustainability in those as ideas and how to help somebody mitigate stormwater runoff by introducing more construction, we should probably put some things in there for that.
And we shouldn't close the door until if there's one issue out in the public now, it's do we have the infrastructure to support the growth that we're, pursuing, and this hits right in the middle of that, right? Because does that accessory unit hook up to the home, the primary home's water system, electric system, whatever? Or do you have to dig new trenches to get back to the accessory unit? I mean, is the street feeder able to take what it's going to get extra business for? I mean, those are all serious questions.
I'd like us to also think about some kind of affordability mechanism here. I don't know what it is, but some kind of reward, some kind of incentive, something that we could bake in early, and not just leave it up to the market. I don't know what it is. I didn't see a lot in the literature on this too, but if there's any ideas would be great. All right, let's close this work session item and move on to information items number 8, Planning Commissioner reports. Any reports, Planning Commissioners?
Quick reports, very short reports.
Or none at all?
Short
Okay.
reports.
Let's move on to 8B,
Happy birthday, Derek. It's only
Director's Report. Mr. Stein.
Thank you, Chair and members of the commission. I will be brief. Mr. Trainer, if we could jump to the look ahead. I never want to surprise you all. And we do have a meeting cancellation coming up in observance of Rosh Hashanah. The group will not be meeting on October 3rd. So your next meeting will be on whatever that tiny number is, the 16th. On October 16th, where you're scheduled to have your final action recommendation on the commercial parking zoning amendment to council, and potentially a work session on code that's developed from the framework you're all looking at tonight. And then we would go all the way, because of the way October is structured, we'd go all the way to October 6th, where we're looking at, we have agreement on it, we just got to make sure it's going to work with the schedule. Speaker series from Coalition of Smarter Growth.
November.
On complete streets. We could also, we're tentatively scheduled with the CIP team to have that be your fall kickoff on the CIP, as you often do in the fall. And then also an early look for your input on a planning program for the planning division for next calendar year. We would take that early input now in the fall, and then we'd present you a finalized product probably as part of your advance early in the calendar year. We're doing a similar exercise to what we would do with you with other departments with inside City Hall. That's it in terms of look ahead. I want to jump to a couple things, really just a few things in the director's report. So first, there are printed copies available at the dais tonight. This is a booklet prepared by one of our planners, Cameron Garris. It's a look back at the city's small area planning program and 11 years of progress that's been made. And of course, the electronic version is in the packet, but it walks through why did the city get into small area planning in the first place, what are the benefits of it in general, and what are the specific benefits that have happened within the city of Falls Church. For each of the city's adopted 6 small area plans, it highlights program goals, summarizes the vision for reinvestment, and then highlights some of the successes that have followed from it. One of the things just that stood out to me as I was flipping through the document, and we captured it here in this summary, right? That there's a common theme of vision for the city here. This idea of reinvesting in underperforming commercial properties. That's really what got the ball rolling on small area plans in the first place. Is that the commercial sector was not keeping pace with the needs of the city. Promoting the use of more green spaces, more people-oriented design, more open spaces throughout the commercial areas, and you've seen a number of plazas and parks developed. Recognizing and promoting that each of these areas within the city has its own unique history and its unique culture, and we want to identify that, celebrate it, and promote it moving forward into the future. Moving toward a more multimodal approach to transportation, where it's not just cars everywhere, but there are options for people who want to get around in other ways. Thinking really about design transitions. The planning opportunity areas always exclude the residential areas around them, but we always include considerations for how to do design, especially tapering building heights. And then, of course, stewardship of the environment. That's one of the things that we noticed about the commercial districts. They tend to have no stormwater controls, very few street trees on site, a lot of surface parking. So that's one of the things we always emphasize is green design throughout all the plans. So that's that item. The next item, there's also a print of this. This is, I think, a fascinating look prepared by Zoe LaRive, again, one of our staff planners. It looks back at single-family homes, and these are, so if there's a home that was built and then torn down, it's not included in this map. So this is only homes that are still standing today, but by that color coding, it breaks out homes by 20-year period of construction, and it walks through all the metrics you can see in that table. So how many homes are there? What's the total acreage that encompasses? What's the acreage in comparison to all of single-family zoning? What's the acreage in comparison to the city's total zoning? And then it looks at some of the environmental factors. So what are the percent impervious, and how does that vary by age of construction? What about size of the home, the square footage, the assessed value, and of course the impact on public facilities around average pupil generation? So one of the things a couple things that stood out to staff as we were looking at this, if you think about that period from 2001 to 2020, these areas of the city have actually been quite active. It's 100 acres of land that has been sort of disturbed as part of single-family construction in that 20-year period. And in general, what you can see are some differences between the newer homes and especially the mid-century homes in terms of their typical size, the percent impervious, and of course the assessed value. And so we flagged some of those key items in the analysis. Because we're short on time, I'll leave it there. And then the last thing to let you know, and these are included in your packets, and we've already got them posted on the website, we have updated the print version of the future land use map and the zoning map. Of course, those are sort of physical representations of what the council already voted on. So this isn't staff changing the maps. This is just staff properly reflecting what the Democratic Council already voted on. So
one comment on the land use map.
Yes.
I bring it up every year. It never changes. At the corner of Pine and Lincoln, it shows a future park. Much as I'd love to live across from a park, my 3 neighbors who have houses there now, I'd miss them. They're nice people. I don't think the city's going to buy their houses and turn it back into a park. It was vacant until about 2010, and then the old. So I bring it up every year. It lives on. So
if we can find a record that. Either we've got it incorrectly sort of labeled, or that it was changed, we will.
Yeah, I mean, I think for years the city had an idea to
Yes.
make it a park because it was vacant for decades up until about 2010,
right,
2011, and then since then now there's 3 houses on it.
Right.
So.
So those maps are available, and credit for those goes to Zoe LaRive. You'll see there's some visual improvements that have been made to the maps to increase readability. We also folded in the floodplain so that we're properly showing those on the zoning map, which I thought was a nice touch, given that we just updated our ordinance, and then a few other changes throughout. I will leave my report there.
Can I make one quick comment? Sorry. On the single family analysis, I love this. Thank you to you and to Zoe for creating it. I don't know why, but this time around when I looked at it, I realized some of these, I think this map is actually a lot more blue than what is here, because not because these lots have been scraped, but because the houses, people have significantly renovated the houses. If you're thinking about it not from a was the land disturbed perspective, but from a is there a new house on that lot perspective, many of these yellow lots, like on Riley, for example, are essentially brand new houses where they took it down to one wall and rebuilt the house. And so I don't know if there's any way to capture that in this. It would be kind of interesting to see what this map actually looks like with that considered. I know my dad's on Pennsylvania, in that area, there's that yellow, a lot of those houses are actually nicely updated houses that people have invested in.
And one of the reasons we had prepared this, right, I think sometimes this is something we report on in the budget each year about sort of what is the pace of tear down and redevelopment of single-family houses, and we report it on an annual basis, but I think looking at it as an overall scope, and I think to the extent we're looking at housing affordability, preservation of environmentally sensitive lands, the window for acting on these sort of 1940s to 1960s windows homes maybe, right, it's getting smaller because every year another 30 of them are going away. And so I think putting this out there and recognizing sort of what's the risk or what's the possibility out there.
Other comments?
One other comment, maybe I read too quickly, but the pupil generation line in this, in the text that accompanies this map said something about housing built since 2000 had a higher proportion of students than housing built before then, and that's true, I think, if it's clear that it's single-family housing, right? But the new housing that's been built, that's multifamily since 2000, does not follow that same pattern. The multifamily new housing tends to have fewer kids, just to make sure that nobody reading it quickly misunderstands.
Yeah, the analysis is specific to single-family detached housing, that's
You
correct.
might just add that, because if somebody took that line out of context, it would not represent accurately what's going on.
All right. 8C correspondence, it's in your packet. Read your packets. Moving on. Is there anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn? Thank you all for staying late. Thanks for the good conversation. We're adjourned.
I'm running, gonna get one drink.